Cecilia Haddad had moved to Australia over a decade ago. Her journey started in Perth, but she later relocated to New South Wales, where she worked as a logistics manager for a transportation company. By 2016, she had settled in Sydney, continuing her career with a mining and logistics firm in Western Australia. Cecilia was a happy and hard-working woman, passionate about ballet and diving. As a successful corporate executive, she had a bright future ahead of her. However, she found herself trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship. Cecilia hadn't come to Australia alone. She was accompanied by Marcelo Santoro, a friend she had known for nearly a decade, someone she had gone to university with in Brazil. What began as friendship gradually turned into romance. Cecilia fell deeply in love with Marcelo, but what started as a loving relationship soon turned into a nightmare. Over time, the jealousy and possessiveness of her partner became unbearable, and in early 2017, she made the decision to end the relationship. Unfortunately, Marcelo refused to accept the breakup. Though they had been separated for several months, they continued to live under the same roof. The situation became intolerable, and Cecilia started to fear for her safety. She asked Marcelo to leave the house, but he refused and began threatening her, insisting they should get back together. His behavior escalated to the point of stalking her in public. Cecilia's friends grew increasingly concerned and begged her to go to the police, but she hesitated. She had confided in her friends that Marcelo had once forced his way into her apartment. Terrified, she barricaded herself in her bedroom, shouting at him to leave while he pounded on the door, demanding to talk. About 10 days before her tragic end, Cecilia warned Marcelo that if he didn't leave the apartment, she would call the police. When it became clear that he had no intention of cooperating, Cecilia moved in with friends, feeling safer almost 3,000 miles away. Despite their pleas for her to report Marcelo to the authorities, she remained adamant that he would never physically harm her. She didn't want him to face legal trouble or deportation, as he was a fellow Brazilian. All she wanted was for him to leave her home. Sadly, her kind heart led to a tragic outcome. Marcelo was not the man Cecilia thought he was, and he was capable of causing her great harm. After spending several days away from her home, Cecilia felt safe enough to return. She had discovered that Marcelo had booked a flight back to Brazil, and with him thousands of miles away, she believed she would be out of danger. Early on the morning of April 28, 2018, she returned to her apartment. To her horror, Marcelo hadn't left. He pounded on her door, demanding to be let in, but Cecilia refused, unaware that he had a copy of her key. After waiting outside her building for several hours, Marcelo used the key to enter her apartment and ended Cecilia's life. Her friends became alarmed when she stopped responding to their messages. They had made plans for the weekend, but Cecilia never showed up. She also missed a scheduled meeting with a disabled client she cared for, which was unlike her. Fearing the worst, her friends reported her disappearance to Australian authorities and notified her family in Brazil. Cecilia's brother, Yoel Haddad, contacted Marcelo's mother, who initially claimed her son was not in Brazil. However, just 5 minutes later, Marcelo called João, confirming that he was indeed in Brazil. Something didn't add up. Shortly after this strange interaction, Marcelo's mother called again, admitting that her son was in Brazil and was on medication. João's suspicions were confirmed when he overheard Marcelo in the background, instructing his mother on what to say. Sadly, there was nothing they could do to save Cecilia. Days after her disappearance, the 38-year-old's body was found by rowers in a river about 5 miles from her apartment. Initially, the police did not suspect foul play, thinking it was a tragic accident. However, After Cecilia's red Fiat was found abandoned at a train station, about 7 miles from where her body was discovered, a murder investigation was launched. Someone had used her car to flee, and all eyes were on the one person capable of causing her harm. Authorities revealed a chilling discovery. Someone had weighed down Cecilia's body with gym weights in her pants pockets, hoping to sink her to the bottom of the lake and erase her existence forever. When her friends heard the heartbreaking news, they were shocked and devastated, but also consumed with guilt. They regretted not reporting Santoro to the police sooner. Cecilia's tragic death left everyone shattered. According to the thousands of messages reviewed by the Australian police, along with statements from friends and family, Cecilia had ended her relationship with Marcelo Santoro, but he refused to accept it. Just 36 hours after Cecilia's death, Santoro had flown to his home in Rio de Janeiro, immediately becoming the prime suspect. The police spent months analyzing evidence to build a solid case against Santoro. There was overwhelming evidence against him. Security footage showed him driving Cecilia's car, and traces of sand and vegetation from the area where her body was found were discovered inside the vehicle. Detectives also uncovered crucial footage from cameras installed in Santoro's apartment. These recordings allowed them to track his movements in the 48 hours leading up to and following the murder. The detectives used cell towers to track Santoro's phone, comparing its movements with surveillance footage collected from homes and businesses along his route. The analysis revealed that his phone connected to a tower near the lake before reaching the final location. The police believe that Santoro had driven around searching for a place to dispose of the body, eventually finding a secluded area along the waterfront. According to their theory, Santoro strangled Cecilia in her apartment's kitchen, then dumped her body in the water. The next morning, he fled to Rio de Janeiro. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the extradition process complicated matters, as Australia's extradition treaties with Brazil meant that Santoro could not be immediately arrested and charged for the murder in Sydney. This led to an international manhunt involving Interpol and high-level negotiations between the two countries. Finally, on July 7, 2018, Brazilian police arrested Marcelo Santoro, 40, at his sister's apartment in a neighborhood in the southern zone of Rio. In a brief hearing, Santoro claimed that he had planned to fly from Australia to Brazil in May, but had moved up the flight due to his father's health issues. The timing of Cecilia's death and his sudden departure raised investigator suspicions, and no one believed his alibi. The authorities were determined to ensure that Santoro faced justice. Santoro remained in one of Brazil's highest security prisons following his arrest. It wasn't until 5 years later, in June 2023, that his trial finally began. Flanked by armed guards and wearing a white shirt and blue pants, Santoro informed the judge that he had changed his legal team, surprising the prosecutors and detectives who had flown from Sydney to Rio to present evidence. The switch delayed the trial by several months. When it finally resumed, Santoro, for the first time, addressed the court, insisting that his return to Rio had been planned in advance. His new lawyer argued that Santoro had flown back to Brazil because his father was undergoing heart surgery. Security footage presented to the jury confirmed that Santoro had been in Cecilia's apartment the day she was murdered. The reconstruction of events showed that on April 29th, Santoro ordered a car through a rideshare app at a station in the suburb. The driver confirmed this and provided information about the route, which included a stop at a gas station. There, a camera captured Santoro withdrawing money from an ATM, a transaction verified by the bank. After collecting the cash, Santoro returned to the car and asked the driver to take him to Sydney Airport. Initially, The driver hesitated to alter the planned route, but Santoro offered him $50 to continue to the airport. They drove across the bridge over the river, where Santoro had likely disposed of the body just hours earlier. As they passed the spot, Santoro asked the driver to stay in the left lane. While there, the driver saw Santoro lower the window and throw something out. He thought it was a set of keys. The journey continued and they arrived at Sydney Airport at 7:23 a.m., sealing Santoro's escape to Brazil. During the trial, Santoro maintained a stern expression, avoiding interaction with others and only responding to questions from his lawyer. A police investigator testified that, in informal conversations while in custody, Santoro had confessed to the details of the crime. According to the officer, Santoro admitted to having a heated argument with Cecilia and strangling her until she died. He then left the apartment, returning 2 hours later to dispose of her body in a river. In his testimony, the detective added that Santoro had said he was recounting the story informally and would only provide an official statement in the presence of a lawyer. However, once he had legal representation, Santoro refused to answer further questions. After this testimony, Cecilia's father took the stand. He recalled how Cecilia had called him just weeks before the crime, telling him that her ex-boyfriend was following her and that she was afraid because he had been entering her apartment without permission. On one occasion, she came home from work to find him inside. She asked for her keys back, but he refused. He also recounted a phone conversation with Cecilia the day before the murder, during which she kept him on the line while she entered her apartment, fearing Santoro might be there. Once she confirmed he was not inside, she ended the call. Cecilia's stepmother testified next, saying that Cecilia had been suffering from psychological abuse for a long time. Andrea recalled a tearful phone call from Cecilia who said, "I can't live like this anymore." The final testimony came from Cecilia's brother, João Haddad, who described Santoro as threatening. He said that his sister lived in constant fear of what Santoro might do. Santoro would frequently monitor her, take her phone and computer, and she had blocked him on all social media platforms. She had started communicating with him only through email, writing in English so there would be a record that Australian authorities could easily understand. Joel also testified that he had asked his sister several times why she didn't force Santoro to leave or call the police. She responded that she was afraid of retaliation and felt guilty because Santoro was unemployed at the time. Santoro faced up to 30 years in prison, but he would never serve his sentence in Australia, as Brazil does not extradite its citizens. After several days of trial, Santoro finally confessed to the crime. In a chilling admission before the Brazilian court, he took responsibility for Cecilia's death and provided disturbing details of the attack. Tearfully, Santoro revealed that he had gone to Cecilia's apartment without her permission, where an argument ensued. In a moment of rage, he strangled her to silence her. He squeezed her neck so tightly that she collapsed. At that moment, he realized she was lifeless, but couldn't remember if she had hit her head when she fell. Panicking, he lifted her onto the sofa and tried to revive her, but she never woke up. Cecilia's mother was forced to leave the courtroom as Santoro recounted the grim details. Her brother, sitting in the front row, shook his head in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how this monster had taken his sister away. Santoro apologized to Cecilia's family, but his hollow words of remorse were not accepted by her loved ones. Before the sentencing, Cecilia's mother, wearing a white shirt with her daughter's picture on it, addressed the court, stating that Santoro was not a human being, but a monster who deserved to be imprisoned. The federal court in Rio de Janeiro sentenced Marcelo Santoro, a Brazilian engineer, to 27 years in prison for aggravated homicide, asphyxiation, femicide, and concealment of a body. The verdict was delivered by a jury of 6 women and 1 man. After the sentencing, Santoro's lawyer announced plans to appeal in hopes of reducing the sentence. For Cecilia's friends, the verdict provided only a small sense of relief. They expressed doubt that Santoro felt any true remorse for what he had done to their friend. They reflected on the loss of a daughter, an aunt, a sister, and a friend who could never be replaced. They hoped that now, at last, Cecilia can rest in peace. Cecilia Haddad's family and friends, having witnessed firsthand the horrors of domestic violence, hope that her tragic story can serve as a lesson to others. For them, Cecilia was never the face of domestic abuse. She was a strong, independent woman. Unfortunately, they came to realize the harsh reality faced by many women worldwide who are victims of violence at the hands of those who claim to love them. Her family urges people not to ignore the signs of abuse and violence. Though they tried to protect her, they now know it was never enough. They trust that authorities and justice will intervene where they could not. Above all, they hope that Cecilia's story will raise awareness and inspire action to prevent other victims from suffering the same fate. Tair Rada was the pride and joy of Shemuel and Anna Rada, inhabitants of the peaceful Katzrin, a short distance from Haifa in Israel. She grew up with her older siblings, Roy and Ohad, who were always watchful and caring towards her. Tair's vivacious spirit, love for the arts, and talent in dance made her stand out. Her friends fondly referred to her as their guiding star. Naturally, Tair's charisma meant she led and others were inclined to follow. Though her beauty and wit sometimes brewed jealousy among other young girls, any rifts were generally short-lived since many of these girls had been friends from childhood. Tair's daily life included attending a local high school, and like many kids in her neighborhood, she preferred walking to school. It was her routine to call her mother upon reaching home, a reassuring habit for the family. However, on the fateful day of December 6, 2006, things took a turn. Skipping her last class to mingle with her friends, Tair was her usual self, blending in and enjoying the camaraderie. Around 1:20 p.m., she got really thirsty, so she went to the school building to get a drink. Some younger students recall seeing her on the floor where the 10th grade classrooms were located. However, at night, when the usual call didn't come that evening, her mother grew anxious. Initially dismissing it as a simple delay or a visit to a friend's house, worry soon set in when Tair was nowhere to be found. Her family tried calling her many times on her phone, but she didn't pick up. This made them worry and feel very sad. Vilana's motherly instincts screamed that something was wrong. Without a second thought, she mobilized a search party made up of relatives, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers, all rallying to find Tair. Shemuel, in sheer desperation, joined the search, navigating through the cold, dark streets. The level of distress and panic among Tair's family was palpable. Nobody had seen her since she went into the school earlier, so the police were quickly sent to the school to start looking for her. At around 7 p.m., a group mainly comprising the Rada family's close circle ventured into the school. They searched through the dark hallways and rooms until they got to the girls' restroom for 10th graders. There they found something unsettling. One of the restroom stalls had its door locked. They saw feet inside, but when they called out, there was a spooky silence, and nobody responded. They used a nearby stall to help them look over, and what they saw was beyond belief. Tair was lying there, not alive, and it was clear that something terrible had happened to her. The walls and floor showed signs of something really scary. She had injuries that were proof of a violent attack, and it was clear that her last moments were filled with fear. The shocking discovery deeply shocked the whole community. Shemuel, who was in a lot of pain, couldn't get close to the crime scene because of how horrifying it was. Tair's brother was so upset that he had to be held back. Everyone in the community was really upset and angry. They couldn't understand how something so terrible could happen in a place where children were supposed to be safe. Parents were worried about their kids' safety and talked about whether it was safe to send them back to school. For a while, the school became a place where a crime had happened, and all the normal classes and activities had to stop. People were confused because the police were searching in a wider area instead of concentrating on the school, which is what the locals thought they would do. The police were talking to people to find out where Tair had last been. 2 people who knew her said they saw her go up the school stairs by herself, without anyone following her. Many students reported being in the restroom around the same time frame as Tair, with several pointing out peculiar occurrences. In the span of 40 minutes, an estimated 10 to 12 girls used the restroom. Yet the police chose to interview only a handful. What struck investigators as particularly odd was how amidst this constant traffic, no one seemed to have witnessed or heard the violent act that took Tair's life. Some students noted anomalies, like the presence of an unfamiliar girl with curly hair. One of Tair's friends, who was confident she knew most of the student body, couldn't recall seeing this girl either before or after that day. Although the mystery girl wore a school shirt, she was perceived as a new student. A specific student claimed to have observed 2 sets of feet in the stall where Tair was later found, Tair's recognizable sneakers, and another pair of youth-sized all-stars. She, however, dismissed this observation, attributing a foul odor in the restroom as a reason to leave quickly. Another student, after knocking on the stall's door, was informed it was occupied. The police seemed especially interested in discerning the gender of this voice. Even though she repeatedly mentioned it was a female's voice, she felt the officers were unsatisfied with her response. With the whole community offering their help and sympathy, the Rada family was going through a very sad and difficult time, trying to understand that they had lost Tair. Haim Sadovsky, a private investigator, was really moved by Tair's case, especially because his own daughter was the same age as Tair. He got in touch with the Rada family and offered to use his skills to help them. They were thankful and told him everything they could. Ilana mentioned a peculiar observation. When a group of Tair's friends visited to offer condolences, 2 girls seemed to be having a secretive conversation, prompting Ilana to think they might be withholding crucial information. Haim investigated further, finding numerous inconsistencies in their police statements. Interestingly, one of Tair's classmates went to look for her bag in class, but didn't find it strange that Tair wasn't there. Another classmate mentioned that Tair seemed unusually distant during her favorite class, theater. When her teacher asked what was wrong, Tair's response was really unsettling, "Because I fear death." This made a lot of people wonder if Tair had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to her. When they looked into it more, Tair's friends shared a really disturbing story. They talked about an 18-year-old from Tiberias named Avi who seemed to be fixated on Tair. He kept calling and texting her a lot, and he even made a really scary threat. He said he would harm her if she didn't agree to be in a romantic relationship with him. Avi made Tair even more anxious by insisting on meeting her, and when she said no, he threatened her with harm again. But upon police investigation, there was no evidence to corroborate any interactions between Tair and this supposed stalker, Avi. This brought up an important question. Why would Tair's friends come up with such a story? Could it be a way to distract from something else? Haim Sadovsky, during his investigation, reasoned that the extreme violence inflicted upon Tair didn't seem characteristic of an adult assailant. An adult wouldn't need to exert such brutality to overpower a young girl. He postulated that the culprits were likely 2 individuals, roughly Tair's age and stature. Aside from the 2 girls who were previously suspected, there was another person Tair knew who caught their attention. This girl was similar to Tair in terms of looks and intelligence, but they had a noticeable dislike for each other. Tair had told her mom about her concerns regarding this person at the beginning of the school year. What's interesting is that this girl left town not long after Tair's death, and when the authorities asked her about students leaving town, she avoided giving a straight answer. Despite initial suspicions pointing towards Tair's classmates, the investigation did not yield any DNA, fingerprints, or shoe imprints as evidence. Authorities then shifted their focus to a gardener employed at the school. His presence in the teacher's lounge on the fateful day, combined with his seemingly disoriented demeanor, as noted by the school psychologist, made him a person of interest. But the school's gardener had a strong alibi that made it hard for the police to connect him to the crime. Even though the psychologist's statements seemed believable, the police were stuck with a lot of uncertainties and not enough answers. Then, in a surprising turn of events, the investigation started looking at someone else who looked very much like the school's gardener. This led investigators to believe that the school psychologist could have mistakenly identified the two. Roman Zadorov, a construction worker at the school, found himself under the investigative lens shortly after Tair's murder. A recent immigrant from Ukraine, Zadorov had relocated to Israel 2 years prior and was earning a living through miscellaneous construction jobs. He had met his wife, Olga, back in Ukraine, and the two were high school sweethearts. His family made the move to Israel, where he was then employed as a handyman for a contractor. Due to visa restrictions, Zadorov wasn't legally allowed to work, so he was compensated in cash. At his wife's urging, Zadorov had initiated the process of acquiring Israeli citizenship during the time of his arrest. He wasn't fluent in Hebrew and mostly communicated in Russian. The police's suspicion was aroused when Zadorov revealed that he had discarded the clothes he wore on the day of Tair's murder. During the long hours of his interrogation, while denying any involvement in the crime, investigators scoured his residence. They unearthed pornographic content on his computer, which, upon closer inspection, involved young but legally aged women. Further amplifying suspicion was Zadorov's collection of knives, especially given the nature of Tair's injuries. Zadorov's detention was based on the circumstantial evidence of the knives and the school psychologist's potentially mistaken testimony. Adding to the tension was the media's reporting of unverified information, claims that Zadorov's DNA matched that found at the crime scene. This, however, was not accurate. While DNA samples were indeed sent to the U.S. for testing, the results were pending. The interrogation tactics took a contentious turn. Authorities missiled Zadorov, stating that his DNA was present at the crime scene in an attempt to extract a confession. Although Zadorov initially resisted, he was pressured into thinking the evidence was undeniable. He speculated that perhaps he inadvertently stepped in blood he had noticed in the school's male restroom, thus explaining any potential trace. After this grueling questioning, he was placed in a holding cell, suggesting further developments in the case were imminent. Something surprising happened. Zadorov's cellmate turned out to be working with the police. They promised him a lot of money, and even more if he could get Zadorov to admit to the crime. But Zadorov didn't give in. He kept saying he didn't do it, especially because he had just become a father and didn't want to lose his family. But after more than a week, the informant tried a different approach. He made Zadorov believe that the evidence against him was really strong, and his best chance to get a shorter prison sentence would be to admit to a lesser crime like manslaughter. That way, he might spend less time in jail. Under significant pressure, and with the informant's guidance, Zadorov was led to believe that he might have acted in a fit of uncontrollable rage, a side effect of feeling marginalized as an immigrant in Israel. Zadorov started doubting his own memory, pondering over past incidents where he acted out and later had no recollection of the event. Eventually, he mused, maybe I did kill her. If everything points towards me, perhaps I did it. Yet inconsistencies remained. Zadorov recalled working late on the day of Tair's murder and wasn't covered in any blood. His discarded trousers, which had been a point of suspicion, were thrown away due to their uncomfortable fit, not any purported bloodstains. Without Zadorov knowing, his talks in the prison cell were being recorded. Taking advantage of Zadorov's growing uncertainty, the investigators convinced him to act out what happened during a crime at the school, and they recorded everything on video. The authorities thought this was the proof they needed. Later, in a press conference, they said they had caught Tair's killer and suggested that a small argument over cigarettes had made Zadorov react violently. However, Tair's family and friends challenged this narrative. They desired more concrete forensic evidence. They felt in their core that Zadorov wasn't the actual perpetrator. Their skepticism was compounded by the police's claim regarding the cigarette altercation. Tair was known to detest smoking and was unlikely to insult anyone, especially someone older than her. Tair's mother, Anna Rada, was persistent in her belief that the real killer came from Tair's circle of friends. Over the years, she gathered information, growing increasingly convinced that there were unsettling dynamics within Tair's close group of friends leading up to her tragic death. Ilana, while digging deeper into the school's culture, found some disturbing information. She thought that a lot of students might be part of a satanic group, and she started thinking that Tair's death could have been a part of a ritual. As the investigation continued, Roman Zadorov's wife got in touch with their legal team. After they did their own investigation, they came to the conclusion that Zadorov was being blamed for something he didn't do and had been manipulated into confessing. Zadorov quickly recanted his confession, yet remained incarcerated awaiting his trial, which commenced on July 2, 2007. The prosecution's narrative took a dramatic turn. They suggested that traumatic childhood experiences from Ukraine were triggered when Zadorov began working at a school, leading to an explosive reaction when provoked by the students. They also misleadingly stated that DNA evidence tied Zadorov to the crime scene, even though the results from the U.S. had not been received. The defense, however, dismantled the prosecution's claims one by one. Despite the crime scene being dense with various pieces of evidence like blood, hair, and footprints, not a single trace linked Zadorov. His residence was scored extensively, even his washing machine, but yielded no ties to the crime. 3 hairs on Tair's body matched 3 different individuals, none being Zadorov. 60 fingerprints found at the site didn't match him either. Moreover, Zadorov's timeline for the day provided him with a reliable alibi. His whereabouts were confirmed by various people at different times, ensuring he was nowhere near the crime scene during the estimated time of Tair's death. The prosecution relied a lot on Zadorov's confession, even though it had many mistakes. When they reenacted the crime, it didn't match up, and it seemed like the police were telling him what to say. They said Zadorov knew things only the real killer would know, but the defense argued that the investigators actually told him all those exclusive details. When Zadorov was asked to show how certain parts of the crime happened, he kept getting it wrong, and the officers had to help him until his answers matched the evidence. Furthermore, the nature of Tair's injuries suggested they were inflicted by a left-handed individual, while Zadorov was right-handed. The multiple inconsistencies in Zadorov's confession raised significant doubts about its authenticity and the integrity of the investigation. Zadorov's confession had a lot of inconsistencies, and the defense team pointed them out clearly. He said he used a knife with a smooth blade, but the forensic evidence showed that the weapon had a serrated edge. To make things more confusing, during the reenactment of the school, Zadorov took the officers to the wrong restroom. The actual crime scene was easy to spot because there was still crime scene tape there, which was a pretty big mistake. Also, when Zadorov showed how he escaped from the restroom cubicle, it didn't match the evidence at the crime scene. He said he jumped over the cubicle door, but the footprints suggested that the killer climbed over the neighboring cubicle instead. Prosecutors argued that a bloody footprint at the scene matched Zadorov's specific shoe brand. However, this claim lost weight given that no blood was found on his actual shoes. Considering the violent nature of the crime, it seemed improbable that he could be present in the cubicle without his shoes being splattered with blood. Despite these glaring inconsistencies and the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crime, Zadorov was found guilty and handed a life sentence. the court labeled his statements as deceitful, adding charges of obstructing a police investigation. After the trial, Tair's mother initially believed Zadorov was the perpetrator, swayed by his confession and the supposed footprint evidence. Yet, in the ensuing months, her conviction wavered. Anna Rada soon went public with her distrust in the legal system and voiced suspicions towards students at Tair's school, even suggesting a satanic ritual might be involved. Refusing to accept the verdict, Zadorov's defense team remained undeterred in their pursuit of justice. Further muddying the case's credibility was a scandal involving the presiding judge, who later resigned due to charges of indecent offenses against minors. Public sentiment started to shift towards Zadorov, with many voicing their support for his innocence and demanding justice for Tair. In 2016, a documentary, Shadow of Truth, spotlighted the case and introduced a harrowing confession from an anonymous individual. He recounted a chilling admission from his ex-girlfriend, referred to as AK, who confessed to Tair's murder. This former student of the same high school confessed to wearing the school's uniform, lying in wait, and killing Tair in a ritualistic manner. This confession eerily aligned with earlier police testimonies from a student. Ak's backstory further darkened this narrative. She had a traumatic childhood, which included witnessing extreme violence and being concealed in a wolf's corpse for warmth. These experiences led her to have disturbing fantasies about violence and blood, to the point where she became obsessed with them. After Tair's murder, AK supposedly told her lover all the gruesome details of the crime, even showing them her blood-soaked clothes and the murder weapon. She went into great detail about what she did and what happened afterward, and it strangely matched what investigators had already found. Bringing back these unsettling claims and stories only added to the complexity and uncertainty of the case. In the dark aftermath of Tair's murder, AK stayed close to the lifeless body, hiding until it was safe to leave. She managed to slip away without anyone noticing, changing out of her blood-stained clothes and getting clean ones before making her escape. Once she got home, she cleaned herself up and disappeared from everyone's radar. Roman Zadorov's defense team was eager to probe deeper into the account relayed by AK's ex-boyfriend. They subjected him to 3 lie detector tests, all of which he passed without any signs of deceit. This prompted the police to arrest AK, a striking blonde woman who vehemently denied any involvement in Tair's killing. AK shifted the blame to her former lover, accusing him of both harboring bloody fantasies and physically assaulting her. Things took a really unsettling turn when AK, who was on house arrest, tried to harm her current boyfriend. When he rejected her, an intoxicated AK threatened him with a piece of broken glass. Luckily, people nearby stopped her from carrying out the attack. When the police arrested her, AK suddenly had a scary change of heart and confirmed the horrifying things her ex-boyfriend had told them before. Even though AK was found unfit to go to trial for the attempted murder and was sent to a mental health facility, no formal charges were filed against her. On the other hand, her ex-boyfriend had to deal with charges of obstructing justice and indecent assault while he was in prison. While he was behind bars, the authorities made him a proposition. If he took back what he had said about AK's involvement in Tair's murder, they would drop his charges. He strongly and dramatically refused, even threatening to take his own life, while insisting that AK was responsible for Tair's tragic death. The tragic murder of Tair Rada not only took away a young, promising life, but also shattered the lives of those who loved her. The passing of Shemuel Rada, Tair's father, in January 2016, further added to the family's anguish. During Shemuel's final farewell, Alana read his heart-wrenching words, calling Shemuel a king soon to be reunited with his queen. Tair underlined the depths of her pain. And amidst her own overwhelming grief, she expressed her own yearning to join them. Yet, the story continued to unfold. The discovery of new forensic evidence in 2018 threw a wrench into the case's perceived conclusions. The matching DNA of a hair found on Tair's body to the man who had earlier made revelations about AK muddied the waters even more. It raised pressing questions. Was he the true perpetrator, or had he been speaking the truth throughout? His proximity to AK during the murder, and the fact that criminals often immerse themselves in investigations added layers of complexity. In 2019, Zadorov's attorney Yoram Halevi filed a request with the Supreme Court for a trial, claiming the existence of a lot of new evidence that proves unequivocally that Zadorov did not murder the deceased and could not have murdered the deceased. In a dramatic ruling in perhaps the most famous murder case in Israeli history, Roman Zadorov was acquitted on March 2023 of the 2006 murder of a 13-year-old schoolgirl that horrified the nation, in a retrial that overturned previous convictions that saw him serve more than a decade behind bars after being sentenced to life. The panel of 3 judges at the Nazareth District Court announced a 2-1 decision to exonerate Zadorov, who burst into tears and later said, "The truth triumphed. I am happy. I was confined to my home. Now I will take my children for a stroll." Judges Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati acquitted Zadorov, while the third judge, Tamer Nissim Shai, ruled that he was guilty. The verdict is some 700 pages long. A representative of the state prosecutors in the case said her team would study the verdict and then decide whether to appeal the acquittal to the Supreme Court. At the end of the verdict reading, Judge Kula turned to Ilana Rada, the victim's mother. "We tried to solve the mystery, but it is possible that Tair took her secret to the grave," he said. Ilana Rada answered, "At last, after 16 years of lies, justice was served. The war is just beginning. This is a cover-up by the prosecution. The prosecutors of the State of Israel murdered my daughter," she added, reiterating her past accusations that the poor investigative work and alleged framing of Zadorov had been tantamount to murdering her daughter all over again. While at the moment no one has been charged for Tair's murder, we hope it will happen in a near future. The Petit family was indeed seen as a model family, fulfilling the best expectations with their stable economic background and exemplary children. They were genuinely admired by those around them. The father, William Petit, was born and raised in Connecticut and stood out in almost every sport during high school, particularly in basketball, where he was a natural leader. In addition to his athletic prowess, he was also the most intelligent of his class, as evidenced by his completion of a law degree at Dartmouth University. However, his true calling was not law. He wanted to help people, care for the sick, and make the world a better place. So, after graduating, he decided to pursue a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his 3rd year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawk, a nurse in the oncology area and co-director of the health center of a pre-graduate internship. They soon fell in love, and those who knew them affirmed they were perfect for each other. They got married in 1985. 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley, and the pregnancy spurred them to form a large family, leading them to buy a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After recovering from childbirth, Jennifer continued her work as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Unfortunately, she later developed multiple sclerosis, an incurable disease she battled for the rest of her life. However, her family never ceased to support her. At the age of 10, their eldest daughter began fundraising for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, which would raise significant funds over the years. Michaela also excelled academically and planned to take over the fundraising efforts when her sister went to college to continue helping her community. She had spent the summer learning to cook and often enjoyed preparing meals for her family. Tragically, this routine activity would lead the family to a fateful encounter with the perpetrator. One July night in 2007, Michaela was preparing dinner for her family, but needed more ingredients for her recipe, so she and her mother went to the nearest market. At the same place was Joshua Komisarjevsky, who had recently been released from prison. Komisarjevsky's childhood was traumatic and complicated. Born to teenage parents, he was put up for adoption a week after birth by his mother and was adopted by the Komisarjevsky family, known for their reputation as distinguished artists in Europe. They were a religious family and very strict with him. Despite his high IQ, he struggled in school, leading his parents to homeschool him. During his trial, he claimed that he was sexually abused by a cousin in his childhood, but his family chose to keep it quiet. This led him to develop a rebellious and chaotic personality. By the age of 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky had been accused of abusing his sister, and it was around this time that he committed his first burglary, marking the start of his career as a thief. In 2002, he was arrested for the first time on 18 charges of burglary and theft, and was subsequently sentenced to 9 years in prison. During the trial, he made a chilling statement, saying, "I like to listen to people while they sleep. I like the feeling of invading their privacy and security." He was released on parole in 2007 at the age of 27. Officials in charge considered him a danger to society, being the calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. However, the jury did not heed the warnings and declared Joshua ostensibly fit for release. After his release, he stayed in a residence for ex-convicts, where he met his accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had spent a significant portion of his life in prison, first being incarcerated at the age of 16 in the year 1980. Over the years, he was frequently arrested for violent robbery and burglary. He was sentenced in 2004 and again granted parole in 2006, which led him to the same halfway house where he met Komisarjevsky. Returning to the night of July 22, 2007, Michaela Petit was preparing dinner for her family, but realized she needed more ingredients for her recipe. She asked her mother to take her to the nearest market to shop. Little did they know they were being observed by Komisarjevsky, who meticulously noted every detail, the make and model of their vehicle, their faces, and Michaela's blonde hair. After shopping, the Petit family returned home, unaware that they were being followed. Shortly afterwards, Hayes sent a text message to Komisarjevsky that read, "I'm chomping at the bit to get started. Need a margarita soon." Hayes then texted, "We still on?" Komisarjevsky replied, "Yes." Hayes' next text asked, "Soon?" To which Komisarjevsky replied, "I'm putting the kid to bed, hold your horses." Hayes replied, "Dude, the horses want to get loose." Komisarjevsky discreetly trailed the family in his car, learning the exact location of their home before withdrawing from the scene. The family enjoyed what seemed like a peaceful and normal dinner, unaware that it would be their last moment together. In the early hours, while everyone slept except for the father, William Petit, who had dozed off in the living room, their peace was shattered by strange noises inside the house. The next thing William remembered was a sense of grogginess, pain, and an inability to formulate a coherent thought. Komisarjevsky and Hayes had entered the house through an unlocked door and initially planned to rob the family. However, the night took a tragic turn. They found a baseball bat in the house and used it to repeatedly beat William, who remained conscious despite the assault. He heard one of the intruders say, "If he moves, shoot him." William was then tied up with zip ties and ropes, immobilized and bound to a pole in the basement. The intruders then went upstairs to find Haley's room, where she was sleeping. Haley and Michaela Petit were tied by their hands and feet to their bedposts, and their heads were covered with pillowcases. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Jennifer Petit had fallen asleep. The intruders quietly entered the room and woke her up. Without much effort, they tied Jennifer's hands and feet. Feeling in control of the house, the intruders took their time to inspect it, even smoking cigarettes in the living room. After collecting jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they decided to leave. It seemed the ordeal was over for the Petit family as they heard the burglars leaving. However, their torment was far from over. After selling the stolen items at a pawn shop and realizing they hadn't gotten as much money as expected, the ex-convicts, motivated by greed, decided to return to the house. They then found a check register with $40,000. They decided to steal $15,000. They also had stopped to fill a couple of gasoline cans before returning, as seen in surveillance camera footage. Back at the house, they told Jennifer their plan, threatening to kill her entire family if she didn't cooperate. Desperate but thinking of her daughter's safety, Jennifer agreed to accompany Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua took advantage of Jennifer's absence, entering Michaela's room, untying her, and beginning to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and assaulted her, recording the act. Afterward, he took her to the bathroom to clean her, ensuring no DNA evidence was left, then ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tie her up again. Evidence that Komisarjevsky raped Michaela came from her autopsy, during which state medical examiner Dr. Wayne Carver found his DNA in her body. At the bank, everything seemingly went well, but Stephen failed to notice what Jennifer did while in the queue. Before approaching the teller, she wrote a note on a flyer asking for help. The note read, "My name is Jennifer Petit. I need to withdraw $15,000 from my savings account. My family is in danger. Please call the police, or they will be killed." The teller decided to give her the money, even though Jennifer had no identification. With the cash in hand, Jennifer left the bank to return to the car with her captor, while the bank employee immediately called the police to report the incident. The manager told the dispatcher of the 911 line that Petit had indicated that the home invaders were being nice and that she believed they only wanted money. The Cheshire police responded to the bank's report by assessing the situation and setting up a vehicle perimeter, without revealing their presence. The police, now aware of the situation, observed from a distance without intervening. Back at the house, Joshua told his accomplice what he had done to Michaela, suggesting he could do the same to Jennifer. Without hesitation, Stephen subdued Jennifer, pressed her body to the ground, and began to undress her. William was able to hear his wife's assault upstairs. He yelled up and heard one of the invaders say, "Don't worry, it's all gonna be over in a couple of minutes." Meanwhile, William Petit, regaining consciousness and hearing his wife's screams, managed to free himself and crawl to the basement stairs, eventually making it to the backyard. He later said, "I thought, it's now or never, because in my mind at that moment, I thought they were going to shoot all of us." In a minute, Joshua went to check on William, only to find that he had escaped. Hayes said in her confession that while he was raping Petit on the living room floor, Komisarjevsky entered and announced that William had escaped. Hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death while continuing to assault her. Soon after, they heard William shouting for help. His neighbor, who initially didn't recognize him due to the injuries, called 911 immediately. Realizing the police would soon be called, the intruders decided to eliminate all evidence. Hayes and Komisarjevsky doused Jennifer's lifeless body and parts of the house, including the daughters' bedrooms and daughters themselves, with gasoline. Investigators would later find the accelerant on the Petit sisters' beds and on the clothing they were wearing. Hayes and Komisarjevsky started a fire and fled the scene. Unaware that the authorities had blocked the area a few miles ahead, they collided with a police vehicle within 5 minutes. After they were surrounded by the police, the two perpetrators were pulled from their vehicle and arrested. They were immediately identified as ex-convicts. Meanwhile, the fire in the house was rapidly growing. An ambulance arrived and transported the gravely injured father, Dr. William Petit, to the nearest hospital. Shortly afterward, firefighters attempted to combat the blaze and, upon extinguishing it, discovered a horrific scene in the remnants of the house. The first body found was that of Jennifer, completely charred with remnants of rope around her ankles. Upon reaching the second floor, they found Michaela tied to her bed, completely consumed by the fire. Haley, surprisingly, had managed to force her restraints and attempted to escape, but collapsed just a few meters away, having inhaled too much smoke. William had been able to free himself of his restraints, exit the house, and crawl to a neighbor's yard for help. The neighbor initially did not recognize him due to the severity of his injuries. Both Hayes and Komisarjevsky confessed to the murders. Detectives testified that Hayes smelled of gasoline throughout her interrogation. Each assailant claimed that the other was the driving force and mastermind behind the home invasion. Komisarjevsky also blamed William for the murders. In Komisarjevsky's diary, which was later entered into evidence, he called William a coward and claimed that he could have saved his family if he wanted to. Stephen Hayes' trial began on September 13, 2010, with a jury of 7 women and 5 men. The defense argued that Joshua Komisarjevsky was the mastermind behind the crime and responsible for escalating its violent nature, while prosecutors held that both Hayes and Komisarjevsky shared responsibility. On October 5, after about 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase began on October 18, with the jury initially split over recommending life imprisonment or death. Hayes' defense argued that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8, the jury recommended the death sentence for Hayes on each of the 6 capital felony counts. Hayes had previously attempted to negotiate a plea bargain for a life sentence, but prosecutors sought the death penalty. Dr. William Petit, the sole survivor, commented on the verdict, and the Connecticut State Judicial Branch offered post-traumatic stress assistance to jurors due to the disturbing nature of the trial. For the first time in state history, the Connecticut State Judicial Branch offered post-traumatic stress assistance to jurors who served for 2 months on the triple murder trial because they had been required to look at disturbing images and hear grisly testimony. On December 2, 2010, Hayes apologized for the pain and suffering he had caused the Petit family and added that, "Death for me will be a welcome relief, and I hope it will bring some peace and comfort to those who I have hurt so much." Judge John Blue imposed 6 death sentences and an additional 106 years for other crimes. However, Hayes' death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in August 2015 when Connecticut abolished capital punishment. Joshua Komisarjevsky's trial began on September 19, 2011. His attorneys offered a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence, but prosecutors aimed for the death penalty, arguing that Komisarjevsky was a confused man led by Hayes. Komisarjevsky was found guilty on October 13, 2011, and the jury recommended the death penalty on December 9, 2011. During his sentencing, Komisarjevsky spoke about his shame and hurt caused by the crime, insisting that he did not intend to kill anyone. Judge Blue set July 20, 2012 as Komisarjevsky's execution date, echoing his responsibility for the crime. However, like Hayes, Komisarjevsky's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment in August 2015 after Connecticut abolished the death penalty. The trials and subsequent sentencing of Hayes and Komisarjevsky marked a significant and harrowing chapter in Connecticut's legal history. The brutal nature of the crimes and the trial's emotional toll on all involved, including the jurors, highlighted the complexities and challenges of the legal system in dealing with such heinous acts. Dr. Petit's statements during the trials underscored the lasting impact of the crime on surviving family members and the community, which continues to honor the memory of the victims. The only survivor, Dr. William Petit, was discharged from the hospital 4 days after his admission to attend the funeral of his family. Haunted by guilt and the torment of having survived, he later established a foundation to help children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. Subsequently, as a member of the Republican Party, he ventured into politics and became a state representative. The murders of the Petit family left a deep impact on the community, which gathers annually to pay tribute to them. Questions remain among family members and the public about whether the authorities acted correctly in their response to the situation. The time spent by the authorities observing the situation from a distance could have been crucial in preventing the tragedy. Maria Cash, the sole daughter in a family of 4 siblings, was a resident of the Barracas neighborhood in Buenos Aires. She was born on December 5, 1981, and enjoyed a blissful childhood with her parents, Federico and Maria del Carmen, along with her brothers Maximo, Patricio, and Santiago. From a tender age, she grasped the significance of friendship when she crossed paths with a girl named Carolina at the age of 6, forging a bond that would endure a lifetime. Subsequently, during their 3rd year of high school, Maria and her best friend Carolina welcomed another addition to their circle, Mariana, who seamlessly became an inseparable part of their group. Maria's social circle was characterized by its quality rather than quantity. Although she maintained amicable relations with her family, she bore the reputation of a rather solitary individual. Even when surrounded by people, she possessed the unique ability to disconnect and revel in solitude. As she matured and gained more independence, whenever she yearned for solitude, she would simply decide to retreat in a coastal city in Argentina known for its pristine beaches, distinctive architectural beauty, and abundant pine forests. Upon arriving, she routinely switched off her cell phone, leaving her friends and family without news of her for several days. Maria developed her talents as a designer and took charge of selling the clothing she crafted. Additionally, she was involved in the sales and promotion of various products. In contrast to her preference for solitude and moments of introspection, Maria displayed a warm and courteous demeanor towards others. Acquaintances frequently remarked on her perpetual smile and serene countenance, making her a delightful presence to be around. Her lively and energetic nature added to her charm. Carolina and Mariana portrayed her as a free spirit with a deep affinity for nature. They emphasized that she lived a modest existence, but consistently extended invitations to dine with her friends and never forgot to mark their birthdays, even if it meant gifting them with a handmade flower. Nevertheless, Carolina also noted Maria's enigmatic side. At some point during her youth, Maria joined a spiritual group, a religious movement centered on self-realization. This pursuit resonated deeply with her, as it provided a platform for meditation exercises aimed at achieving inner peace. While seemingly incongruous to outsiders, this spiritual practice held profound meaning for her, accentuating her inherently spiritual and tranquil disposition. Maria's involvement in the group, along with the enigmatic inner circle she cultivated within the group, remained shrouded in secrecy from her friends and family. Despite its fundamental role in her life, she limited her disclosures to the fact that she dedicated extensive hours to meditation in pursuit of self-awareness. It was within the realms of this group that Maria crossed paths with Juan Pablo, a teacher, proprietor of a restaurant, and government employee in Jujuy. He resided in the picturesque town located 13 kilometers to the north of San Salvador de Jujuy. Over time, Juan Pablo and Maria's friendship deepened to a point where their closeness sparked speculations among both acquaintances and family members. Mariana and Carolina recalled Maria's glowing remarks about him. In late June 2011, Maria confided in her friends, expressing her desire to journey to Jujuy to promote her products, a decision that raised eyebrows, considering the considerable distance and geographical separation from the capital. Maria meticulously orchestrated her trip to Jujuy, veiling the true purpose from everyone, or at least weaving 3 different narratives. She casually mentioned her intention to rest, to sell some of her handmade garments, and even claimed that a friend had extended a job offer at a bar in Jujuy. During a phone call in the presence of her friends, she cryptically mentioned a job opportunity from a Jujuy-based friend without divulging further details. She outlined her plans to depart in July and return to Buenos Aires by December. In the days preceding her journey, Maria convened with her friends for a dinner gathering at Mariana's residence. That night, she shared an overwhelming desire to spread the love of God among people. She carried a Bible brimming with highlighted passages, marking a newfound religiosity, as per Mariana's recollection. In reference to her voyage to Jujuy, Federico Cash, her father, explained that she sought serenity and opted for a destination devoid of the chaos of the capital. She had informed him about a job offer at a friend's bar. On July 4, Maria commenced her journey and at 7:30 p.m. left her home, packing minimally, indicating her intention to be away for just a few days. Her father, Federico, accompanied her to the bus terminal, where she was set to board a bus destined for San Salvador de Jujuy, scheduled to arrive around 6 p.m. the following day. Little did he know that it would be the last time he saw her alive. Somewhere along the journey, an event occurred that remains shrouded in ambiguity to this day, lacking clarity in its entirety. What is unequivocal is that on July 5, Maria made an unexpected decision to disembark in Rosario de la Frontera, a town situated in the province of Salta. This deviation from the plan caught everyone by surprise. In subsequent communications with her family and her friend Juan Pablo, she vaguely alluded to her discomfort with certain fellow passengers, citing an unpleasant experience during the bus ride. However, she refrained from disclosing the true nature of the situation. Standing by the roadside, Maria resorted to hitchhiking and ventured southward until she reached Santiago del Estero. None of these detours aligned with her original itinerary. Nevertheless, after reconnecting with her friend Juan Pablo and disclosing her financial predicament, she resolved to resume her journey. He generously offered to purchase her a bus ticket online, enabling her to continue her voyage to Jujuy. Maria eventually arrived in Jujuy in the early hours of Wednesday, July 6. During her stay there, she contacted Juan Pablo from a local mechanic's workshop where she had borrowed a phone. Juan Pablo's sister answered the call, informing her that he was occupied with work and couldn't personally pick her up. Instead, she suggested taking a taxi, with the assurance that they would cover the fare upon her arrival. Subsequently, all communication with Maria ceased. When Juan Pablo returned home, he found her absent. At approximately 4:30 am, he sent her numerous messages, urging her to either visit her grandmother's house or one of his own restaurants. He provided detailed addresses and insisted on covering the taxi fare, but received neither a response nor her arrival. Around 2 p.m., the young woman was spotted once more, attempting to hitchhike along Route 34. During that afternoon, she conversed with her family, revealing that she had depleted her funds and was feeling unwell, yet she refrained from divulging further details. On the night of July 6, she was captured on video passing through a toll booth. Notably, she was without her suitcase but carried a backpack. Remarkably, the same backpack seen in the footage was discovered by toll booth employees who chose to retain it and eventually handed it over to the police several days later. According to some accounts of the case, on July 7, Maria sought medical attention at a hospital in Salta. However, as the medical examination was about to commence, she opted to depart. Witnesses attested to her appearing disoriented and erratic, as if she lacked a clear sense of direction or purpose. Her overall appearance was somewhat disheveled. Nevertheless, she did manage to consult a pulmonologist in downtown San Salvador de Jujuy. He charged her 100 pesos for the consultation and prescribed medication for a respiratory issue. In contrast to the descriptions provided by those who encountered her at the hospital, the pulmonologist asserted that she exhibited perfect lucidity, cleanliness, and neatness. These conflicting reports presented a perplexing challenge for investigators. On the same day, July 7, she embarked on a journey to Salta. A truck driver who had previously seen her in Pampa Blanca, Jujuy, confirmed encountering her while walking along a street in downtown Salta. Another woman also observed her in the vicinity, seemingly in search of a craft store that included a gym on its upper floor. Around 5 p.m., from an internet cafe in that city, Maria sent an email to her brothers, requesting their phone numbers. In the email, she expressed her desire to return to Buenos Aires, citing the loss of her belongings. Regrettably, the communication abruptly terminated, instilling concern within her family. Consequently, they promptly made the decision to report her disappearance, filing a formal complaint at a police station in Salta. Fearing the worst, her father, and one of her brothers opted to embark on a car journey to Hubei. Nonetheless, their efforts to locate her proved futile, as she had already moved on from the area. It appears that on July 8th, Maria engaged in an unexpected encounter at the toll booth. She boarded a van driven by a producer and former councilman from the Salta locality. He transported her to the roundabout, where Maria once again solicited a new ride. This time, she succeeded in securing a ride from a truck driver heading to Route 34. Witnesses who encountered her in that vicinity attested to her appearing bewildered and disoriented. She disembarked at a religious pilgrimage site and was spotted in the vicinity of the sanctuary at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Following this moment, all trace of her vanished. Right from the outset, Maria's family pointed out numerous shortcomings in the investigation. For an initial period of 8 months, the case was categorized as a mere disappearance, with the Salta judicial system overseeing the inquiry. However, in early 2012, Maria's father lodged a report suggesting the possibility of human trafficking. Consequently, the case and its investigation were transferred to the federal prosecutor's office in Salta. The investigation proved to be an intricate puzzle due to the abundance of false leads, some motivated by ill intent and others stemming from genuine concern. Furthermore, Maria's physical description was rather commonplace. A young woman of slender build, average height, with dark hair and eyes. These particulars aligned with the characteristics of countless individuals, resulting in a deluge of incoming calls that ultimately led the investigation astray, as these leads failed to yield any substantive progress. One of the most perplexing aspects that impeded the search was the uncertainty surrounding Maria's intended destination. She underwent 3 transfers across different provinces, introducing an additional layer of complexity. A multitude of lineups, extensive interrogations, consultations, and inspections were conducted, all to no avail. Additionally, 2 extensive search operations were carried out in the region and along Route 34 in an endeavor to eliminate the possibility that she had ventured into the wilderness to spend the night or, alternatively, had fallen victim to a crime along the highway. Speculation even arose that she might have boarded another bus and journeyed to a different region of the country. As the months elapsed, the hypothesis of human trafficking began to wane. Maria's age did not conform to the typical profile sought by human traffickers, who typically target adolescents or significantly younger women. Nevertheless, it was never entirely dismissed, with investigators pivoting their focus toward the potential occurrence of a psychotic episode. Remarkably, in the testimony provided, Maria was portrayed as being poorly dressed, disheveled, and seemingly adrift. She embarked on and disembarked from buses, engaged in hitchhiking, and had even misplaced her identification documents. Contradictorily, Juan Pablo, one of the last individuals to converse with her, recounted that during their telephone exchanges, she exhibited a sense of normalcy, offering no indication of being disconnected from reality or under the influence of substances. There was no discernible sense of fear or urgency in her voice, nor did it seem like she was evading anyone. He emphasized that their conversation flowed like any ordinary exchange between friends. However, he did acknowledge 2 aspects that struck him: her admission of having no money and her decision to head to Hudui without confirming his presence there. He described Maria as an exceptional person, noting that he had never known her to grapple with substance dependencies. He expressed astonishment at her sudden visit to Hudui because they had lost touch for a considerable period, and out of the blue, she called to inform him of her presence there. Simultaneously with the official investigation, Maria's family pursued their search independently. They frequently voiced their frustration with the sluggish pace of the police investigation and the lack of tangible progress. After her disappearance, they engaged in conversations with numerous truck drivers, shopkeepers, neighbors, and law enforcement officers. Across these cities, they disseminated flyers bearing her photograph and contact information for individuals who might possess pertinent information. It was reported that they gathered more than 4,000 leads, yet the overwhelming majority proved to be either false or malicious. Maria's friend, Juan Pablo, also conducted his own inquiries. They combed through police stations, private clinics, public hospitals, and forensic facilities. The police conducted extensive searches and explored numerous theories, yet with time, most of these leads were discounted. Maria's friends even contemplated the possibility that she might have experienced a psychological episode during which she lost self-recognition, track of time, or fell victim to drugging followed by abduction. Nonetheless, these notions remained firmly within the realm of conjecture due to the absence of concrete evidence. Within this context, it is noteworthy that the relentless search conducted by the Cash family did not go unrewarded. While it did not yield Maria's whereabouts, it did lead to the discovery of other women who had fallen prey to criminal organizations engaged in human trafficking. These women had been ensnared in various locations and were ultimately rescued, thanks to the Cash family's endeavors in sharing their stories with the authorities. Amidst this unyielding pursuit, tragedy befell the family once more. In 2014, during one of their numerous journeys across the country in pursuit of any trace or lead, Maria's father tragically lost his life in a traffic accident in La Pampa. He had ventured there to distribute flyers bearing his daughter's visage. Several weeks following his passing, his wife received a phone call that rekindled her determination, faith, and optimism to continue the fight. Pope Francis extended his condolences for her husband's demise, expressing his heartfelt sorrow. In response, she wrote a letter of gratitude, wherein she conveyed how the Holy Father's compassionate words had filled her heart with love and rekindled the faith and hope that had dwindled from her life nearly 3 years earlier, alongside the disappearance of her daughter. Following Maria's father's tragic passing, his children persisted in their quest to locate Maria. Yet, as is often the case in disappearance investigations, they appeared trapped in a labyrinth, devoid of new leads to guide them. Then, in 2018, a significant development emerged when human remains, including a skull, were discovered in the Bolivian city of Oruro. There was hope that these remains might provide answers about the fate of the young designer, and this possibility garnered extensive media coverage. However, subsequent DNA analysis conclusively ruled out any connection to Maria. The Salta judiciary confirmed that the DNA extracted from the recovered remains did not match that of the Cash family, whose samples had been collected in Salta. Consequently, the mystery surrounding Maria's disappearance persisted, much like it did at the outset of the investigation. In that same year, 2018, a woman named Julia came forward, alleging physical abuse and cruel treatment, and implicating her ex-husband, a prison guard, in Maria's disappearance. She claimed to have witnessed Maria alive and held captive within a human trafficking network, at least until 2013, 2 years after her initial disappearance. Julia's attorney stated that, according to his client's testimony, these women were confined in a piece of land with rented infrastructure. While this lead was diligently pursued, it too failed to yield the discovery of Maria. The subsequent year, in September 2019, as part of this renewed investigative approach, search operations were conducted in an area known as Las Palomitas in Salta, based on information provided by an anonymous witness. Regrettably, these searches produced no results that could advance the investigation. In November 2020, forensic experts released an updated image of Maria Cash, employing age progression techniques. The intention behind this effort was to assist in her potential identification and to prompt new leads. Maria's family expressed hope that this initiative would yield fruitful results. However, once more, these endeavors proved unfruitful. In a succinct recapitulation of the case's progression, in 2023, certain Argentine media outlets revisited the topic of Maria's disappearance. They underscored that during the early years of the search, numerous leads were pursued, and a plethora of hypotheses were formulated. However, as time passed, these trails gradually dissipated, and the prospects of locating her dwindled. Nonetheless, the authorities remained steadfast in asserting that the search had never been abandoned. Anna Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Marianne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Marianne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Marianne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Marianne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Marianne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Marianne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Marianne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Marianne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Marianne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Marianne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter, Anna, alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Marianne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Marianne and Anna lived together in Lübeck, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Marianne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Marianne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Marianne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Marianne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Marianne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Marianne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Anna up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Marianne. Some say they argue because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Marianne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Marianne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Marianne's life. When Marianne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Marianne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Marianne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. He ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Marianne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration, increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Marianne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Marianne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Marianne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Marianne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Marianne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Marianne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Marianne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Marianne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Marianne, faced the judge. At this moment, Marianne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Marianne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Marianne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Marianne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Marianne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Marianne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Marianne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Marianne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Marianne's photo, dubbing her the avenging mother. The case became the most well-known instance of Vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. Television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Marianne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Marianne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Marianne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Marianne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Marianne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Marianne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after,
Marianne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine,
stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Marianne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaas, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaas faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Marianne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Marianne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lübeck cemetery.
Bobby Jamison and Sherilyn Jamison, despite some eccentricities, were a rather ordinary couple. They preferred to keep a distance from commitments and other socialization demands. The couple met in the summer of 2002 and quickly fell in love, marrying soon after. Sherilyn had a son, Colton, from a previous marriage, who got along well with Bobby. In 2004, their family expanded with the birth of their daughter, Madison Jamison. The Jamisons lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, where Colton had spent part of his childhood. However, in July 2009, Colton was sent to live with his father for unknown reasons. Life wasn't always easy for the Jamisons. Sherilyn had battled depression since her sister's death in a bizarre accident involving a bee sting on her tongue. She was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sometimes neglected her medication. Bobby faced his own challenges after a car accident, left him with chronic debilitating back pain, preventing him from working. The constant pain and financial worries contributed to his depression as well. Their mental health issues began affecting their marriage, leading to arguments and discussions about possible divorce. The Jamisons were a reclusive family, often keeping their personal matters hidden from even those closest to them. Bobby and Sherilyn were deeply religious and engaged in spiritual practices, but they also harbored intense paranoia about spirits invading their home. They sought guidance from a preacher, sharing their fears with him. Sherilyn was particularly concerned about spirits communicating with their daughter, Madison, who talked to an imaginary friend named Emily. This behavior was likely Madison's way of coping with the family's chaotic environment. Bobby, worried about spirits on their roof, inquired about special bullets to eliminate them. He also possessed a satanic Bible, intending to use it for exorcising spirits from their home. The Jamisons owned a storage container on their Eufaula property, intending to use it as temporary housing while building their new home on a mountain. The container attracted attention from neighbors due to the unusual graffiti Sherilyn, who claimed to be a witch, sprayed on it. She believed her black cats were being poisoned and accused neighbors of the act, causing discomfort and leading them to avoid the Jamisons. Sherilyn's desire for solitude ultimately aligned with the neighbors' inclination to keep their distance. Feeling uncomfortable in their neighborhood and seeking a fresh start to possibly save their marriage, the Jamisons showed interest in a remote piece of land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from their home. On October 7, 2009, the family set out in their truck to see the land but got lost and stopped to ask for directions. Deciding to return home, they ventured back to the mountains the next day. The Jamisons, being a private family, often went weeks without contact with friends or relatives, so it wasn't unusual for them to be out of touch for over a week. On top of this, the family had informed Madison's school that they would be withdrawing her, as they were moving away, hence why the school never asked after her. 8 days after anyone had last seen or heard from the Jamisons on the 8th, Hunters reported an abandoned truck on the top of Panola Mountain and reported it to police, who determined that it belonged to the Jamisons. The truck was locked, and it appeared that all of the family's possessions, including their dog Maisie, were inside. Maisie was miraculously still alive, but extremely malnourished, having not eaten for a number of days. Authorities freed Maisie from the truck, bringing her to live with Bobby's mother. When authorities began investigating the mysterious disappearance of the Jamison family, they learned that on October 8, 2009,
44-year-old Bobby, 40-year-old Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, were last seen by a man living in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. This sole witness informed the authorities that he saw only the family and no one else in the area during that time. At the time, the county sheriff told the press that the witness was a landowner in the Red Oak area and that they had searched the area but found no clues. Officially, the Jamisons were near this area to view a 16-hectare plot they intended to buy. Strangely, they planned to live on this land in a storage container they already owned on their property in Eufaula. Police discovered several personal belongings in the truck, including cell phones, Sherilyn's purse, and Bobby's wallet in the family's truck. Believing the family might be lost in the dense and treacherous woodlands of Panola Mountain, authorities utilized the GPS data from Bobby and Sherilyn's cell phones to trace their movements. The GPS trail led them up a hill where they found small footprints, presumably belonging to Madison. At the hill's summit, a photo of Madison was discovered on the cell phone belonging to Bobby. The picture sparked varying interpretations of her emotional state. Some observers suggested she looked on the verge of laughter, while others perceived her as close to tears. The theory emerged that someone other than her parents might have taken the photo, given her lack of smile and seemingly uncomfortable body language. However, the photo's significance as evidence is debatable, as discerning Madison's thoughts or feelings from the image is challenging. It's argued that a 6-year-old would likely not hide fear or fret, so if she felt intimidated by the photographer, her expression would probably clearly reflect fear, which is not evident in the photo. Authorities estimated that the family spent approximately 15 minutes at the mountain's peak before returning to their truck. This moment marks the beginning of the mystery, as their subsequent actions and whereabouts remain unknown. The following day, a large-scale search operation was launched, involving over 100 law enforcement personnel, volunteers, search dogs, and helicopters, but the family was not found. Further investigation of the truck revealed several intriguing clues. Hidden under the front seat was a bag containing $32,000 in cash. Additionally, an 11-page letter written by Sherilyn, filled with hostility and hatred towards Bobby, was discovered. The letter conveyed Sherilyn's feelings of neglect and indifference from Bobby towards his family. She criticized him for being a recluse and for not valuing his family, highlighting the strained dynamics within the household. Parallel to the on-site investigation, police followed essential steps in any missing persons investigation. They spoke with the couple's family and close circles, where they learned that the Jamisons had some peculiar traits. Friends reported that the family had begun acting strangely, and both Bobby and Sherilyn had lost a significant amount of weight before disappearing. The sheriff at the time speculated that the family might have been involved in drugs. Although no evidence of this was found, there were also references to the couple's erratic behavior, seen moving objects to the vehicle in a way that seemed robotic or trance-like. Unfortunately, questioning those close to the couple only confirmed their atypical nature, but shed no light on the family's whereabouts. As months and then years passed without further leads, the case remained unsolved. The next discovery related to the case occurred in 2013, again reported by hunters. This finding would at least partially resolve the mystery of the Jamison family's disappearance. The hunters found the remains of 3 bodies, belonging to 2 adults and a child. The discovery of the remains occurred near where the Jamison's vehicle was found in 2009, leading many to believe they belonged to the missing family. However, confirmation was needed. At the time, the sheriff was asked by journalists why the bodies were not found in 2009, despite the intensive search and the use of tracking dogs. She speculated that the bodies might have been covered by falling leaves, which could have caused rescuers to overlook them. Bobby's paternal uncle was the first family member to speak with the media. He explained that while it wasn't definitive that the remains were his nephew and his family, all evidence pointed to them. He had been contacted by the FBI about the discovery and said he had no hope that the family was still alive 4 years after their disappearance. For him, finding the bodies provided closure. Although it was sad because the reasons for their fate were unknown, he found it particularly painful that an innocent child had met such an undeserved end. Meanwhile, authorities warned that the process of identifying the bodies would take time. The county sheriff's office, the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the state medical examiner's office searched the area, but found no evidence to help identify the remains, as they reported in a joint statement. A spokesperson for the medical examiner's office said they received the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child and announced they would use pathological, anthropological, and forensic methods to determine if the remains belonged to the Jamison family. She clarified that identification could take days or even years, depending on the condition and preservation of the remains. Many months later, on July 3, 2014, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to the Jamison family. The forensic analysis of the bodies revealed no soft tissues, only partial skeletal remains due to significant scavenger and rodent activity at the site. Despite this, the bodies appeared to have been placed side by side and face down. Skulls were present, and although a small hole was found in Bobby's skull, possibly caused by a bullet, the state of decomposition meant the medical examiner could not determine a definitive cause of death. Since the Jamisons' disappearance, 5 theories have been publicized to explain their deaths, but none have been confirmed. The first theory suggests an accident, pointing to weather reports in the area at the time showing temperatures of around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the days following their disappearance, the area experienced heavy rains, but not enough to cause death. The bodies were found only 4 kilometers from their truck, raising the possibility that the family got lost in the woods and died of hypothermia and exposure. However, this doesn't explain why their truck was left as if they intended to return soon. The second theory proposes a scenario of murder followed by a suicide decision. It was known that both Bobby and Sherilyn suffered extreme stress throughout their lives. 11-page long letter was found in their truck, in which Sherilyn expressed her resentment towards Bobby, accusing him of being a hermit. Another letter found in their family home was said to mention death. Although Sherilyn's mother stated that writing such letters was common for her due to her bipolar condition, Sherilyn's gun was also missing from the car. This raised the question of whether Sherilyn could have walked 4 kilometers with her family to kill them and then take her own life. Police also investigated the theory that the Jamison family's deaths were a murder-suicide, but not by Sherilyn, instead by Bobby. According to this hypothesis, Bobby might have read his wife's resentful letter and decided to end everyone's lives. However, this theory weakens with the evidence, as no weapon was found near the bodies. This does not rule out the possibility of death by poison or other means. It's also unclear why they would have traveled so far from the truck to end their lives, especially since Bobby had mobility issues in his own home due to his injuries. The scenario of him walking 4 kilometers through mountainous terrain seemed improbable. Moreover, This does not explain why they were found lying face down, side by side. The third theory involves Bobby's father, 67-year-old Bob Dean Jamison, as responsible for the murders. It was revealed that in early 2009, about 6 months before the family disappeared, that Bobby had filed for a protective order against his father. He described his father as a dangerous man who thought he was above the law and had connections with prostitutes, gang members, and methamphetamine trafficking. Bobby also claimed that his father had threatened to kill him and his family on 2 separate occasions, once in November 2008 and again in April 2009. Bobby feared for their lives as his father had once hit him with a vehicle. Bobby had been involved in a dispute with his father, which resulted in Bob removing everyone except Madison from his will. The dispute stemmed from disagreements over a supposed deal between them. Bobby claimed he worked at his father's service station for free, under the understanding that he would inherit half of the business. But his father later said that agreement never existed. However, Bob died just 2 months after the Jamisons' disappearance and had been ill for some time. His brother Jack stated that Bob was either in a hospital or a nursing home at the time of the incident, and added that, although Bob was a disturbed person, he was not capable of being involved in the murders. The fourth theory is that the Jamisons were killed by a cult. Sherilyn's mother believed that the Jamisons were murdered by a religious cult in southeastern Oklahoma. According to her, the cult had violent members and had put Sherilyn on a blacklist. However, she never named a specific cult, and no evidence has been found to support this theory. It has also been suggested that the Jamisons practiced witchcraft. Reports indicated that a witch's Bible was found in the family's home. However, Sherilyn's best friend Nikki stated that the supposed satanic book was purchased solely for the purpose of a prank. Yet, Bobby's spiritual advisor mentioned that Bobby had confessed to reading the satanic Bible. This raises several questions about the theory of a cult-related murder. Why were the bodies found deep in the forest, and how did they get there? Were they forced to walk at gunpoint, or were they taken there after being killed? Transporting bodies 4 kilometers through dense forest would be challenging, suggesting the involvement of more than one perpetrator. The fifth theory relates to drug issues. Rumors suggested that Bobby's parents were involved in illicit substance trafficking, and some suspected that the family was involved in a drug deal gone wrong. The Jamisons' aforementioned strange behavior could be explained by drug influence. However, former sheriff stated that there was no evidence to support the theory of drug use or trafficking by the couple. Many have pointed out that Bobby and Sherilyn were good parents and would not have taken Madison with them if they were involved in a drug-related event. The fact that the bodies were found aligned and face down could suggest an execution-style murder. If so, was it premeditated? Who knew they would be in that remote mountain area at that time? And what was the motive? Alternatively, they might have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen and were silenced. But again, why were they taken so deep into the forest? For time, when revisiting the case to find closure and a responsible party, a particular detail emerged. The bottle found in the Jamisons' vehicle. It was determined to belong to a former guest at the family's house who had been expelled for being the white supremacist. Sherilyn, who had Native American ancestry, had reportedly expelled him at gunpoint only a month before the disappearance. The dispute arose because the individual, whose identity remains confidential, expressed beliefs that all non-white people needed to die. While he seemed to have a motive for revenge, he provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect by the FBI. Rumors then circulated that the Jamisons were on the blacklist of a white supremacist group known as the United White Knights. The mountains where they disappeared were known as a hotbed for far-right extremists, and near where the Jamisons' truck was found, A vandalized car was covered with racist slogans. Sherilyn had supposedly been part of the group's missions, but had rewritten the messages with religious words of peace and love. Although white supremacists are active in the area, no concrete evidence has been produced to support their involvement in the case. Ultimately, all the theories remain speculative. To this date, what happened to the Jamisons on October 8, 2009, remains unknown, and unless someone who knows the truth comes forward, it will continue to be an unresolved mystery with limitless theories but very few answers. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979, in Stockton-on-Tees, a trading town situated on the banks of the River Tees. At that time, it was part of the extinct county of Cleveland, later reassigned the county of Durham in England. She was the daughter of Deborah and Anthony Glass and had an older sister named Claire, who was a year older than her. Vicky entered the world prematurely, weighing less than 3.3 pounds, and both her life and her mother's were in danger. Eventually, Vicky's parents separated, and when she was 6 years old, her mother remarried Colin Goodall, a man also living in Stockton-on-Tees. This new union gave the young girl an additional stepsister named Cheryl, who was older than her, and a younger brother named Thomas. From that point on, Vicky lived with them. Vicky had light skin, light brown eyes, and long hair, a look she maintained from childhood into adolescence when she decided to cut her hair. Despite being born with a hearing impairment, music was Vicky's passion, and she considered herself a huge fan of Michael Jackson. Her musical inclination led her to join the local jazz band at a very young age. Clearly, she was a determined young lady. She remained with the group from the ages of 13 to 18, during which time she always enjoyed the trips they took to perform in various places. According to her acquaintances, she felt proud when she performed. Vicky also had a deep love for animals, particularly cats. In fact, she rescued one which she named Sooty. Vicky attended Blakestone High School, also located in Stockton-on-Tees, and had a keen interest in running and sports in general. However, she was very diligent and never neglected her studies. Later on, she secured a job at a local factory in Teesside. While some people who knew her saw Vicky as a quiet and somewhat shy girl, her family and closest friends knew her to be very cheerful. They said she had a heart of gold and was very affectionate. She was indeed a much-loved person who seemingly had everything and lived in a healthy and happy environment. Unfortunately, her life took a dramatic turn when she was nearing her 18th birthday. According to her mother, she began associating with the wrong crowd and started using drugs. The young woman became addicted to heroin and became so dependent on narcotics that she started offering sex services to support her addiction, eventually leading her to leave her home. Over time, Vicky began frequenting the suburbs of Middlesbrough, about 8 kilometers to the east of Stockton-on-Tees, particularly a truck parking lot where transport companies used to park their vehicles overnight. By December 1999, Vicky had developed a chest condition and was homeless. Through a friend, she met a man who lived in Middlesbrough, who offered her shelter while she recovered her health. The homeowner took care of her, and the place became her permanent residence. He assisted her in scheduling her medical appointments and ensured she didn't miss them. Despite the man's efforts to help the girl heal and improve her life, she continued with her addiction to illegal substances and continued offering her services as a sex worker. In the year 2000, Vicky continued with the same lifestyle, and so her 21st birthday arrived on September 21. Unfortunately, the joy quickly turned into tragedy. According to case reports, on that Thursday night, the young woman worked and also celebrated. Apparently, Friday, the 22nd, passed without incident, and by Saturday, the 23rd, Vicky went to her home in the company of a friend to change clothes. Around noon, both of them left the place. Hours later, Past midnight, Vicky met with a client on Borough Road, located in the center of Middlesbrough. They then went to 104 Princes Road, a place frequented by drug users and sex workers. She was dressed in a white shirt, light gray pants, and white sneakers. Some time later, the young woman and her client took a taxi down on Union Street and went back to this male's home in Norton, Stockton. After spending some time there, Vicky called a taxi line she often used. The driver picked her up at around 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24, and about 20 minutes later, he dropped her off in Middlesbrough, specifically at the junction of Union Street and Eshwood Square. This is just to the rear on a pub that was then called the Shipmate. As soon as the taxi driver dropped the woman off at the designated destination, he returned to the headquarters of the taxi company he worked for. That night, and in the following days, Vicky did not return to her house. Her friend, the man who had helped her when she needed it most, became worried as her absence prolonged. He started asking about her at all the places she frequented. Since no one could provide information about her whereabouts, he decided to contact the police to report her as missing. In the same month, a man named Sean Tooley was arrested. His arrest was related to the asphyxiation death of a 20-year-old woman named Kelly Mallinson, who also engaged in sex work to finance her addiction and frequented the same places Vicky did. Tooley was sentenced to life in prison a year later. On Friday, November 3, 6 weeks after Vicky's disappearance, a man who was walking dogs made a gruesome discovery on a trail in the town of Danby, a picturesque village located in the North Yorkshire. Around 6 in the morning, the man came across the naked and decomposed corpse of a woman. Immediately, amidst his shock, the citizen notified the police. The remains were taken to the coroner's office, where experts determined that it was Vicky. Due to the state of the remains, pathologists concluded that she had been exposed to the moorland winds for several weeks. Although they couldn't establish the cause of her death, they stated that there appeared to be no wounds and no signs of abuse, sexual or otherwise, nor any indication that she had died from drowning. Officials who arrived at the scene searched the area surrounding where Vicky's body was found for clues and tried to locate the victim's clothing, but their efforts yielded no results. Cleveland and North Yorkshire police officers initiated investigations. A team of 40 officers tried to reconstruct the unfortunate young woman's last steps during the night of September 23 and the early hours of September 24. They interviewed both the taxi driver and the employees of the places Vicky frequented, as well as the friend who had given her shelter and some witnesses and colleagues. Sergeant Brian Dunn, who was leading the investigation at that time, made several public appeals for assistance from the community. They needed someone to provide information that could be useful in catching the perpetrator. Vicky's family was devastated by the tragic death of the young woman. On that day, when her mother returned from work, the police were at her house. Her initial reaction was to ask if they had found her daughter and if she was okay, but when she received the news, she began to tremble. Until that moment, she was convinced that her daughter would reappear alive, and every contact she had with the police involved asking if they would help Vicky get off drugs once they found her. On November 13, Vicky's mother, Deborah, lashed out at the press for labeling her daughter as a drug addict. She emphasized that this fact was irrelevant and that the important thing was that she was a 21-year-old girl who had lost her life in a brutal manner. The following week, posters with Vicky's photograph were placed in various locations, especially in the places where the girl had been on the night she disappeared. In that same month of November, the police reported that they had spoken to more than 500 people and had taken statements from 150, including former clients of the young woman, taxi drivers, neighbors, and truck drivers. They also analyzed over 60 hours of closed-circuit camera recordings located in the areas the victim used to frequent. November was passing when Vicky's father, Anthony, and her stepfather, Colin, went together to the site where the lifeless body of the girl was found. On that day, Deborah's absence was notable, but the mother was too affected to participate in the ceremony. In addition to placing flowers, they prayed for any clues or information that would lead to the truth about what had happened. Anthony sent a plea to members of the community to help them find closure. In doing so, he stressed that they only needed a phone call to end the nightmare they were living, not knowing what had happened to their daughter. The investigation focused on the hundreds of truck drivers who used to frequent the parking lot in Middlesbrough. As part of the inquiries, a 39-year-old married man was arrested, but his identity was never revealed. Eventually, his connection to the case was ruled out, and he was released. In January 2002, the investigators in charge of the case arrested a 47-year-old unmarried man, identified as Eric Coates, who resided in North Yorkshire. This was the third time officials had interviewed him in relation to the case, as he had been unable to provide a credible alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky disappeared. The agents found it suspicious that he couldn't remember certain details precisely. The man admitted that he had been with sex workers, but denied any involvement in Vicky's death. He also revealed that 1 or 2 girls had mentioned to him that the crime was related to a drug debt settlement. His house, which he shared with his parents, was searched by the police, as were other properties belonging to his family. During the searches, officers seized computer equipment, clothing, diaries, videotapes, and a vehicle. Additionally, this individual had a criminal record. He had been arrested and imprisoned for 15 months in 1994 for unlawfully restraining and assaulting a sex worker in Middlesbrough. However, he was acquitted of charges of attempted sexual assault and indecent assault against the same woman. Ultimately, it was determined that Eric had nothing to do with Vicky's crime, and he was released. His father, a former county councillor in North Yorkshire, stated that they were as interested as the police in finding out who had taken the young woman's life. Years later, in 2006, Eric was imprisoned and sentenced to 14 years for pleading guilty to 15 sexual offenses against girls aged between 11 and 14 years. In this context, it was also revealed that his father had faced 12 charges of sexual offenses, but was not brought to trial due to health reasons. Returning to 2002, in July, Cleveland police questioned a man identified as John Taylor, who was serving a life sentence after pleading guilty to the kidnapping and murder of a 16-year-old girl in Leeds, West Yorkshire. The investigations into Jean also yielded no results, and he was ruled out as a suspect in the attack on Vicky. In December 2006, detectives from Cleveland Police reported that they had contacted their colleagues in Suffolk to explore possible connections between Vicky's case and the tragic deaths of 5 other sex workers. For these crimes, truck driver Steve Wright had been arrested, and 2 years later, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, the authorities in Cleveland ruled out any connection of the man with the death. When the tragedy reached its 10-year mark, Vicky's parents visited the place where their daughter was found lifeless and placed flowers in her honor. Deborah told reporters that she thought of her daughter every day and that it was a pain that would never go away. In December 2010, the case file was once again examined, searching for possible links, such as a man identified as Stephen Griffiths, who had taken the lives of 3 sex workers in Bradford, West Yorkshire, and was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, at the beginning of January 2011, any possible connection to Vicky's disappearance was ruled out. For the family, the pain of loss was compounded by the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to her and the belief that the person responsible for her death remained at large. Vicky's grandmother, who was very close to the girl, was deeply affected and passed away a year later. Her mother, Deborah, passed away in 2015 at the age of 55 without ever getting to know the person who took her daughter's life. Anthony later admitted that during the first 24 months after the tragedy, he couldn't work and lost his job. He confessed that he couldn't smile, and it took him a long time to regain belief in himself and convince himself that it wasn't his fault. In 2017, the Cleveland police requested a grant to fund 3 separate historic cases in the vicinity of Middlesbrough. A year later, the Home Office agreed to provide approximately £3.7 million, about $4.6 million at the current exchange rate, to fund the Historic Investigation Unit aimed at thoroughly reviewing unsolved cases. In addition to Vicky's case, officials also reopened the cases of Donna Keogh, who disappeared in 1998 at the age of 17, and Rachel Wilson, who disappeared in 2002, with her body being located in a ditch 10 years later. There were some similarities in these cases, such as the age and occupation of the victims, and the fact that all 3 occurred in Middlesbrough. In October 2018, a website published information that rekindled hopes of uncovering the truth about Vicky's death. The news referred to a high-profile convicted offender. The inmate had been a taxi driver and was responsible for ending the life of a 22-year-old office worker who went missing in March 2011, and her remains were found in a grave. According to the media report, at the time of his arrest, the man confessed to the murder of another young woman, age 20, committed 8 years earlier, and he provided information about the location of the body. However, no connection between the criminal and Vicky's case could be established. In September 2021, the police announced that they had significant new lines of investigation regarding the unsolved case. In this context, they made a fresh public appeal, urging anyone who knew any details about what might have happened to Vicky in 2000 to contact the authorities. The officers expressed hope because they now had more modern forensic techniques and plans to interview potential witnesses and examine over 2,000 hours of CCTV footage. During this time, one of the detectives on the case mentioned that in the preceding 12 months, a lot of work had been done on Vicky's case. He explained that a detailed review of the original investigation had resulted in 300 recommendations, with the primary one being to initiate a new investigation, leveraging advancements in forensic science. In the same year, the case of Rachel, mentioned earlier, was closed with the arrest of a 62-year-old man identified as Keith Hall, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison. In 2022, the investigators leading the case appealed to the community to collaborate by providing any information that could be helpful in solving the mystery surrounding Vicky's death. They were particularly interested in identifying the truck driver who was seen with the young woman hours before her disappearance. To achieve this goal, they released CCTV images in which Vicky is seen walking with a man in a parking lot on the night of her disappearance. And later, she is seen conversing with a truck driver to whom she may have left some of her belongings. This latter man was described as an individual with white skin, broad shoulders, aged between 34 and 38, and having a distinctive mark on his face. The police also launched a website with Vicky's name in an effort to gather information about the case. As part of these initiatives, detectives spoke with hundreds of people, and while they collected a significant amount of information, the identity of the truck driver remains unknown. That year, the family issued a statement reaffirming their deep love for Vicky and the difficult times they were going through. They emphasized that Deborah, Vicky's mother, passed away without answers, knowing that the person who took her daughter's life was still on the streets. On November 3, 2023, 23 years had passed since Vicky's lifeless body was found, and the investigation to find the person responsible for her death is one of the most extensive in the history of Cleveland police in England. Each year that goes by without justice is another year of suffering for the relatives of Vicky Glass, who would be 44 years old today. The police stated that in order to provide closure to the family, they need the support of the community. They are confident that someone out there possesses the missing piece to solve the puzzle and expressly called on that person to come forward to the authorities to help uncover the truth. Roger Bluml was born on January 17, 1965, into a household bustling with many members, including his parents and 7 children, 6 boys and a girl. Roger's family was not only large but also very united, raised with a strong sense of values and community life. Even while still in high school, Roger proved to be a hard-working young man with goals for the future. He began driving his father's truck and, after graduating from the local high school, worked in concrete transportation. Later, he discovered that his true calling was in sales, a field in which he eventually found success. According to his friends, he was one of those people capable of selling ice to Eskimos. This skill was also accompanied by a generous, cheerful, and extroverted personality. He always seemed happy, and nothing pleased him more than making everyone around him have a big smile on their faces. Roger had a good life and an excellent relationship with his family. The only thing missing was a partner, and one day he achieved that too. The details are not specified, but a close friend later recounted that at the end of the evening when he met a young woman who captivated him, Roger declared with absolute resolution that she was the woman he was going to marry. The girl in question was named Melissa. She was born in Wichita on January 1, 1960. Her childhood, too, was spent in a loving family comprised of 3 girls and 3 boys, though a younger sister died before reaching her first birthday. Melissa was a sweet, hard-working girl, always ready to help not just her family but everyone around her. She began working as a cashier at a bank where she made a successful career. In the following years, her seriousness, commitment, and sense of collaboration earned her several promotions that led her to become the vice president of the bank. That first meeting marked the beginning of the union of 2 soulmates who married in 1991. Life for the Blumls seemed perfect as Melissa climbed the ranks within the bank, and Roger's charm led him to establish his own business. Roger loved to share time with friends and bring joy to everyone around him. In Melissa, he found the perfect companion. Moreover, both had a strong social consciousness that led them to collaborate and participate in any charitable, sports, or collective activity that took place in their community. However, as we've seen in almost all stories, a perfect life does not exist, and for the Blumls, the only thing missing was a child to bring laughter and joy to their loving home. Unfortunately, this desire remained elusive for the couple, and after years of unsuccessfully trying to conceive, Roger and Melissa began to consider the idea of adopting a child. With this intention, they contacted a local social worker. Their wishes were heard, and doubly so, as a woman named Keisha Shaberg had put up her 2 sons for adoption. Anthony, 7 years old, whom everyone called Tony, and Christopher, 4 years old, known as Chris. Keisha's idea was to place them in an open adoption so she could maintain contact with her sons and the family raising them. However, the Blumls did not consider this the best option, as they wanted to raise the children as their own and completely remove them from what had been a tough start in life. In the end, Roger and Melissa's approach prevailed, and from that moment, Tony and Chris formally became part of the Bluml family, starting to enjoy a life they never knew existed. In fact, it was later known that Tony was amazed he was allowed to have dinner every day. The children quickly adapted and began to enjoy their new life. They attended elementary school and successfully completed that stage as good students. In high school, they were also successful, had no problems with their peers, were fully integrated and made a wide group of friends, and excelled in sports, particularly in wrestling and football. Tony made rapid progress in wrestling, securing second place in a competition in his division. At that time, everything seemed to promise a bright future for the boys and a happy life for the whole family. But the Bluml's world began to turn upside down when Tony reached his senior year of high school. The young man began to change what had until then been exemplary behavior. He turned into someone who was constantly in conflict with his parents, accusing them of always favoring his younger brother Chris. From then on, he engaged in alcohol consumption, disregarded curfews, and even smoked marijuana. Things in the Bluml household became chaotic, and soon it seemed that the last hope for the young man to correct his path was lost. For a long time, Tony had expressed a fervent desire to join the United States Air Force after finishing high school, but this dream dissipated due to his own behavior when, in 2013, he was arrested for an unspecified act of aggression, and shortly after graduating, again for driving under the influence of alcohol. With these records, he could say goodbye to a future in military aviation. These events did not lead Tony to reflect. On the contrary, it plunged him into a downward spiral. Once he graduated from high school, his life had no direction. He did not want to continue studying, nor did he want to work. In fact, he wanted to do nothing more than sleep late and spend the rest of his day immersed in a cloud of cannabis smoke. Melissa lived in terror of the boy's outbursts of rage. And amidst all this situation, which was so difficult to bear, there was something else that the Blumls did not know. Since the spring of 2013, through social media, Keisha had been contacting her biological sons. While it seems Chris either rejected Keisha's friend request or was not very receptive to communicating with his biological mother, Tony not only accepted immediately, but was also completely excited to reconnect with his real mother. Keisha had been devastated after giving her sons to the Blumls. Although she was relieved to know that both had been welcomed into the same good family and would stay together, she could not resign herself to the lack of contact. Reconnecting with her eldest son filled Keisha with excitement, but at the same time she developed a great resentment towards the Blumls, believing that they had turned Chris against her. However, this feeling was undoubtedly overshadowed by the happiness of reconnecting with her firstborn. Additionally, the news of Tony's problems with his adoptive parents fueled Keisha's hope of reuniting with her son, and she wasted no time in offering him to come to see her. Meanwhile, at the adoptive family's home, far from improving, things were getting worse. The conflict reached a point of no return when one day, in the midst of one of his fits of rage, Tony punched a hole in a wall. This was the turning point for the Blumls. They could no longer risk their own safety and that of Chris. After several unsuccessful discussions trying to put an end to the eldest son's behaviors, Roger and Melissa came to the difficult decision to tell Tony that he had to leave the house. The young man initially wandered aimlessly but soon realized he had to do something to sustain himself, so he got some jobs at fast food restaurants and supplemented those meager earnings by selling cannabis. Although he slept like a nomad from night to night at some friends' houses, he ended up associating with a group of youths who were deeply involved in excessive drug use. And amid all these despairing events, a lifeline suddenly appeared for Tony when Keisha told him to come to California to live with her. Tony eagerly accepted the invitation, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Keisha's house in California. The young man was accompanied by his best friend from high school, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to dedicate himself to drug dealing. The two young men were excited because they arrived with the hope of having Keisha's support, who was also versed in the drug trade, to start a large marijuana business in the area, and they even talked about entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that the two young men had arrived to live in a small apartment, which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Keisha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Keisha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Keisha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Logically, at one point things reached an unacceptable limit, something that happened when Sean found out that Tony and Braden were selling marijuana near her house. She let them know that what they were doing was simply unacceptable and dangerous for her as the property owner. Consequently, she told them to take their drugs elsewhere. Additionally, after this episode, Sean gave an ultimatum to the house occupants. Everyone had to get a job or leave the apartment. Far from making the group reflect, as was her intention, what it achieved was that they formed an alliance to show indignation towards her. They decided to leave the apartment and go to a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. But that was not the solution either, because without having an income, after those weeks they had no means to sustain the hotel payment. The need for money did not make them consider working decently. The first idea they had was to return to Kansas, perhaps because it was familiar territory for Tony in terms of drug dealing. After almost a day on the road, the group decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was there that Tony told his travel companions that he had come up with an idea, which was to end the lives of his adoptive parents to claim the inheritance. Once they arrived in Wichita and found accommodation at a hotel they rented for a month, they dedicated themselves to refining the details of that idea. It was a simple solution. They had to end the lives of Roger and Melissa, claim the insurance, sell the assets, and use the resources to start a new, larger-scale drug business. Tony was convinced that the original family, which he had returned to, would become rich by cultivating and selling marijuana. Tony even proposed a perfect day to carry out the crime. It would be Friday, November 15th of that year, 2013, as his brother Chris would not be at home, as he had to attend an event related to his wrestling practice. Tony had been a star in that discipline and still maintained contact with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that night. Gradually, the plan was formed, in which Tony would communicate with Roger and Melissa and invite them somewhere with the excuse of talking about what had happened between them and try to fix things. Tony's idea was that, while there was no one at home, Braden would take Keisha to the residence so she could enter and steal some valuables. Tony also knew where his adoptive parents kept a significant amount of money for emergencies. The idea was that the act would appear to be a robbery gone wrong. But from the beginning, the final intention was clear. When Roger and Melissa returned home, Keisha would end their lives. Everyone thought it was an excellent plan, but later, Braden backed out. He did not want to participate in the act, but agreed to help by acquiring the guns they would need. As a substitute, he recommended a friend of his, also a former high school peer named Andrew, who could take on the role as the driver to take Keisha to the Bluml's residence. As promised, Braden procured 2 pistols purchased from other criminals. It should be mentioned that there was never any intention to share the money with Andrew, who was agreed to be paid $1,000 to act essentially as a driver and support for Keisha in the robbery. In the end, she would be the executor. In early November, Keisha posted on her social networks a photo of her with Tony and a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Finally, the day arrived. It was Friday, November 15th, 2013, and as Tony had predicted, his wonderful adoptive parents did not refuse to meet with him. The meeting went peacefully. While at the Bluml's house, the scene was completely different. As soon as Roger and Melissa left for the meeting, Keisha and Andrew entered the house, forced the garage door, and began to rummage through everything. They took the opportunity to take some small, valuable items and the cash the couple kept in the house for any eventuality. Once the first part of the plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew hid beside the secluded residence to wait for their victims to arrive. They soon received a call from Tony, informing them that the meeting had ended, that his adoptive parents had dropped him off at the hotel, and they were on their way home. The wait was not too long. As soon as the Bluml's vehicle stopped in front of the parking gate, the two attackers came out of their hiding place. Keisha immediately positioned herself on Melissa's side, while Andrew aimed at Roger to keep him still. Melissa, still surprised, recognized the mother of the children they had adopted more than 10 years ago to provide love, stability, and a better future. She only managed to say, "Oh my God, Keisha," when a precise shot to the head made her collapse in the seat. Roger, completely disconcerted, tried to assist his wife. Meanwhile, Keisha reached the man's window and pulled the trigger towards Roger's head, but the gun jammed. The woman made several attempts to shoot while he was frozen, with the slumped body of his wife next to him. Finally, the gun fired, and Roger also collapsed next to the one who had been the best partner for his life project. Once the fatal plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew boarded the vehicle they had arrived in and quickly left. The Bluml spouses remained there until around 9:15 p.m., when Chris returned from his meeting and found the terrible scene. He immediately called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home and found his parents practically unconscious inside their van. The young man stated that Roger was coughing and that Melissa was bobbing her head up and down. Both had gunshot marks on their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to try resuscitation maneuvers while emergency services arrived a few minutes later and took over the situation. Miraculously, the Blumls were still alive, but their lives were hanging by a thread, so they were immediately transported to a hospital. While all this was happening, upon returning to the hotel where they were staying, Keisha seemed to have a panic attack and stated that all she needed was to consume some illicit substance, and she did so accompanied by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Keisha handed over the used gun and a wallet of Melissa's that she had stolen from the house to be disposed of in a nearby stream. Andrew threw the items into the pond of a nearby park. The following day, Tony began using the money stolen from his adoptive parents' home to start trafficking marijuana, earning his first $100. Unfortunately, that same day, Melissa lost her battle and passed away at the age of 53. Tony also went to the hospital to see his father, but what he did not know is that sometime before, he had been removed from both the Bluml's will and their insurance policies. Consequently, the two heinous crimes had been committed in vain. In the following days, it was also discovered that Andrew had not been paid and was even unaware that Keisha had taken cash from the Bluml family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. In the initial inspections of the Bluml residence, the police noticed that the garage door had been forced open, and inside the home everything was in disarray. There were items scattered everywhere. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other items had been stolen. The authorities wondered if the attack on the spouses had been a result of them arriving while the thieves were still in the house. However, the fatal assault had occurred before the couple entered the home, so this initial hypothesis was dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, there were no significant fingerprints, although investigators did find a bullet casing. Then, the authorities turned their attention towards the victims' workplaces, thinking perhaps an upset client had sought revenge. But this theory was also discarded, so it was time to talk to people close to the couple. The first on the detectives' list was Tony, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But the young man insisted he knew nothing and had not participated in the act. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had gone straight back to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. This information was confirmed by the staff at the tolls. The second on the list was Chris, who had found the bodies, but he was quickly dismissed after verifying his statement that at the time of the incident, he was at a dinner with members of the wrestling team. However, the investigators found something strange in the young man's behavior. He didn't seem overly disturbed and instead appeared to be lost in thought. When the police pursued this direction and asked him what he thought had happened to his parents, Chris immediately replied that there was only one person who came to mind. He added that the only one who might hold any grudge against their parents and perhaps be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities got a lucky break in their search for the culprits. A man contacted the police to say that a young man who was a friend of Tony had approached him intending to buy a gun. The detectives focused on this individual, and upon checking his background, found he had a long history related to drugs. Moreover, they discovered he had traveled to California along with Tony. It was Braden. Sooner rather than later, Braden received a message from his family informing him that the sheriff's office investigators were looking to interrogate him about what had happened to the Blumls. The morning after receiving this information, Braden went to the police station. A press report states that on his way to the police station, he stopped by a pond to throw away something, apparently the guns used in the crime, which had not been disposed of as planned. According to this account, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found in the bag he threw a pistol that had not been fired in the attack. Braden's interrogation lasted for 3 days. At first, the young man maintained he had nothing to do with the incident, but he couldn't withstand the pressure from the authorities and ended up confessing everything he knew, stating that the idea for the attack had been Tony's. Tony Bluml, 18 years old, and his biological mother, Keisha, 35, were arrested on November 19th at the hotel where they were staying. Additionally, Andrew, then 18 years old, was arrested. And finally, Braden, also 18, was put behind bars on November 20th of that same year, 2013. At that time, Keisha did not admit her participation in the robbery and other crimes, although the 3 young men confessed what had happened. On November 25th, 2013, the accused made their first appearance before the court via video conference. On that occasion, they were all charged with the same offenses: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. The 3 young men were set a bail of $500,000, and for Keisha, the bail was set at $1 million. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at 48 years old, he joined his beloved Melissa. And after Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men worsened, as they could be charged with capital murder, which could imply a death penalty sentence. Indeed, on January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with a count of capital murder for being the alleged perpetrators of the death of more than 1 person in the same incident. Additionally, Keisha was charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year. By that time, Braden had negotiated with the authorities, and in exchange for a benefit in his sentence, he ended up becoming the prosecution's star witness. After a year of negotiations, not only did Braden reach an agreement, but 2 other individuals involved in the crime also negotiated with the prosecution. According to the agreements reached, the accused would not dispute the charges against them and would waive their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty and to drop some charges. Starting in mid-2015, in separate hearings, each confirmed their decision to plead guilty. The judge sentenced Keisha to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the capital murder charge, and additionally to 122 months in prison for 2 counts of aggravated robbery. The sentences would be served consecutively. In her opportunity to speak, she stated she deeply regretted what had happened and lamented everything the Bluml family had to go through. The rest of her statement was controversial, as she claimed she had nothing to do with the incident, having no anger towards the Blumls. On the contrary, she had the utmost respect for them, as they had given Tony and Chris a wonderful life, and she would always be grateful for that. According to official records to this day, Keisha remains detained in a high-security level correctional facility. The second to face his fate was her son, Anthony Bluml, known to everyone as Tony, who received the same sentence as his mother. During the sentencing hearing, Tony, who declined to speak when given the opportunity, heard the victim impact statement made by his aunt, Christina Bluml, who thanked the authorities for administering justice and referred to all the love that Roger and Melissa had given the boy. In complete silence, Tony listened to Christina's heartfelt words, and at one moment, tears almost sprang from the young criminal's eyes. In the end, the woman told Tony that he had chosen his path without anyone forcing him to make those decisions. She added that perhaps one day he might understand his choices, or perhaps he never would. Tony has been since then in a correctional facility. His record up to this moment listed a significant number of prison infractions related to smuggling, fights, unauthorized phone use, explicit sex, theft, and disobedience, among others. A week after these sentences, it was Andrew's turn, the only one who did not agree to acknowledge his responsibility and was found guilty of first and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, plus 155 months. Finally, Braden, the last of the participants in the incident and who from the beginning had reached an agreement with the prosecution, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 24.5 years in prison. According to his official record, his first opportunity for release will be on May 28, 2035. However, his prison record shows that far from reforming, Braden had received 71 disciplinary reports for disobedience, threats to others, stimulant use, intoxication, possession of tobacco contraband, theft, and dangerous smuggling, among other causes. In the end, the district attorney expressed satisfaction with the outcome of this case. It's worth noting that even though she had waived that right, Keisha attempted to appeal her sentences unsuccessfully. At the end of this story, only one thing remains undisputed. The lives of 2 wonderful people, Roger and Melissa Bluml, were cut short with a terrible and unnecessary ending. The bitterness, or perhaps the guilt of a woman who led a life of excess for which she gave up her children for adoption, was the genesis of the tragedy. She couldn't bear that one of her descendants wanted nothing more to do with her, which apparently led her to direct her anger at the people who gave all their love and well-being to her children. For his part, Tony repaid all the love and care received from that couple with resentment, envy, and violence, resorting to an unjustifiable path of substance abuse, and finally, a double crime. Keisha's younger daughter ended up being sent to a foster home. As for Chris Bluml, he managed to overcome what happened and has led a good life with the support of the family. It was just past 1 in the morning on May 14, 1983, in Orange County, California. Officer Sterling and Sergeant Jaguar were on duty on the San Diego freeway when they spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving really weirdly. They went to pull the car over, and that's when they met him face to face. They didn't know it yet, but they were looking at the most wanted killer of the last 10 years. The man stood there, spilling beer on the ground and with his pants undone. He agreed to take a breathalyzer test, which he obviously failed. As they were about to arrest him for drunk driving, they felt something wasn't right, like they were missing something big. Sergeant Jaguar checked the car and found something that would haunt him forever. A young guy in the passenger seat, lifeless. This was the scene that the killer hadn't recorded in his secret list, which had more than 67 victims on it, victims who had faced unimaginable horrors. Randy Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California. He was the fourth kid and only the son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and 3 daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In 1948, the Krafts moved to Westminster, Orange County. Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. After finishing high school in 1963, he went to Claremont Men's College in the small town of Claremont. Randy was into a lot of things there. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and got really into politics. In 1964, he even supported the Vietnam War publicly and helped campaign for Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate. Randy also worked at a local gay bar and was so busy that he started taking Valium to help with his stomach and headaches. However, over time, his friends got worried about how much medicine he was using. His grades started to drop. He began drinking, played poker all night, and even failed his econometrics class, which delayed his graduation by 8 months. 1968 was a big year for Randy. He got his economics degree and shifted his political views from right-wing to more democratic, even working hard for Robert Kennedy. That same year, he joined the U.S. Air Force, aced the tests, and showed he was really smart with an IQ of 129. He got sent to Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, California, a place with high security. But in 1969, Randy's life changed dramatically when he told his family and friends he was gay. They accepted him, but the military didn't, and he was forced to leave. Feeling down, Randy went back to bartending and later became a truck driver in Huntington Beach. He also started teaching courses at California State University, Long Beach. There, he met Jeff Graves, a younger guy from Minnesota. They started dating, and it looked like Randy was getting his life back on track. But he had a dark secret. In March 1970, while wandering around Huntington Beach, Randy met 13-year-old Joseph Alvin Fancher, who had run away from home. Randy invited him to live together, which seemed nice, but he had evil intentions. After bringing Joseph to his apartment, Randy drugged and attacked him. Joseph managed to escape while Randy was at work, and a passerby saw Joseph's bad state and called for help. Joseph was taken to the hospital, where he told the police about being drugged and beaten by Randy, but he didn't mention the abuse. The police went to Randy's apartment without a warrant, and fearing for their jobs, they decided not to press charges, leaving Randy free to offend again. By the end of 1971, the police found an unidentified, decomposed body on Ortega Highway. The victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender. The autopsy indicated he died from alcohol poisoning on September 20th of that year. The investigation stalled, with no leads on Wayne's clothes, belongings, or his killer. On December 26, 1972, police on Highway 405 in Seal Beach found 20-year-old sailor Edward Daniel Moore's body. He was tied at the wrists and ankles, had a hit mark on his face, probably from a blunt instrument, bite marks, and shockingly, a sock stuffed in his rectum. It looked like he'd been thrown from a moving vehicle. 6 weeks later, on February 6th, police found a man's body, aged between 17 and 25, near the Terminal Island Freeway. He couldn't be identified, but like Edward Moore, he had a sock stuffed similarly. Police suspected the same killer was behind these crimes, but the culprit remained at large as more victims appeared. On April 9th, 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. He had been castrated and sodomized. 13 days later, another dismembered body was found and given the name John Doe. On July 30th, 20-year-old Ronnie Jean Wiebe was found strangled, with marks suggesting he'd been restrained and hung before death. The year ended with another gruesome discovery on December 29th. 23-year-old art student Vincent Cruz Mestas was found dead in the San Bernardino Mountains. He was openly bisexual. As with several previous victims, one of the victim's socks had been forced into his rectum. Mestas's hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the 3rd victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John Liras. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Larris's body into the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Jonadis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Jonadis had been strangled to death with a length of string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On March 29, 1975, Keith Crotwell and his friend Kent May left home to hitchhike south, unaware of the fate awaiting them. Kraft lured the 2 men from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. The police started searching right away, and soon they got a tip from 2 young people. They said they saw Crotwell and May in a black and white Mustang speeding into a parking lot. The driver quickly leaned over, opened the passenger door, and pushed May out onto the ground. He was almost out of it, probably from drinking or drugs. They saw Crotwell slumped over the driver's shoulder before the car sped off into the night. A month later, they found Crotwell's head at a pier near Long Beach Harbor. The police scoured the city for clues to find the driver. They eventually got a name, Randy Kraft. On May 19th, he was questioned. He admitted picking up Crotwell but claimed he left him at a cafe and knew nothing more. He also said his car later crashed and he had to call a tow truck. Jeff, still his partner, backed up his story. The detectives didn't believe him, but the Los Angeles County prosecutors wouldn't charge him due to the lack of evidence and because they couldn't find the rest of Crotwell's body or determine how he died. So, Jeff was free again. After a cool-down period, his crime spree just got worse. On December 31st, he kidnapped 22-year-old Mark Hall, tied him to a tree in a canyon, abused him, cut off his private parts, stuffed them into his rectum, burned him with a lighter on the chest, nose, and cheeks, gouged out his eyes, and then attacked him with a broken bottle. As if that wasn't horrific enough, Kraft suffocated Mark by stuffing leaves and dirt into his throat. When the police found Mark's body, they were shocked, and the autopsy revealed he was alive for much of this ordeal. This led the police to profile the killer as highly intelligent, methodical, and organized, possibly with military background, noting the use of surgical tape on several victims' noses, a technique used in the military to prevent body decomposition after death. On January 24, 1976, investigators from different parts of Southern California gathered in Orange County to discuss how to proceed with the search. Meanwhile, Kraft was living a peaceful life. In the following months, he ended things with Jeff Graves and soon found new love in Jeff Seelig, a 19-year-old baker's apprentice. They moved to Laguna Hills, promised each other forever, and shared a passion for threesomes, often picking up people from highways for this. During this time, Kraft wasn't violent, and it seemed his relationship had quenched his thirst for blood. He went nearly a year without committing any crimes until he struck again on December 10th, killing 19-year-old Paul Joseph Fuchs. Though Fuchs's body was never found, his name was on Kraft's list of victims. Kraft lay low after that, but on April 16, 1978, he strangled Scott Michael Hughes after drugging him with Valium and removed one of his testicles. Hughes's body was found fully clothed except for his shoelaces. On June 11th, 23-year-old Roland Gerald Young was found near a San Diego highway, mutilated and stabbed, then thrown from a speeding vehicle. 8 days later, the body of Marine Richard Allen Keith was found in Moulton Parkway, showing signs of being tied up, with strangulation as the cause of death and alcohol in his system. Despite ongoing efforts, police couldn't pin down the killer or save the victims, including Keith Arthur Klingbeil, a 23-year-old found beside Interstate 5, strangled with his shoelaces. At the hospital, they discovered he had ingested large amounts of paracetamol and alcohol and had burn marks on his chest. He died shortly after. On September 29th, Richard Anthony Crosby, 20, was found dead under similar circumstances along Highway 71 in San Bernardino, having vanished the day before while hitchhiking. The California Strangler, as the media dubbed him, had the region in fear, with every officer on alert for the next crime. On November 12, 1978, trucker Michael Joseph Inderbeaton's body was found near the San Diego freeway, castrated like the others. In addition to having been castrated, Inderbeaton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft's attacks became less frequent, with the next one occurring in July 1979 on a highway. Donnie Harold Crissell, a 20-year-old sailor, died from acute alcohol poisoning, with signs of being tied and tortured. 2 months later, parts of 21-year-old British tourist Keith Anthony Jackson were found in trash bags behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were ever found. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated, and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On February 18, 1980, 19-year-old Mark Allen Marsh's body was dumped near Templin Highway, last seen hitchhiking to Buena Park. That summer, Kraft's job took him to Oregon, where he stayed in Portland and claimed 2 more victims. Michael Sean O'Fallon, a recent college graduate hitchhiking across the country, fell prey to Kraft, who drugged and strangled him, his body found near Salem. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. Kraft forced him to swallow a toxic level of Valium and paracetamol before strangling him with a cord. In September, Kraft returned to California and resumed his crimes, this time involving Robert Loggins, with whom he took incriminating photos. These photographs, which were subsequently found in Kraft's possession, show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated, and in various nude, pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, he kidnapped Michael Cluck while hitchhiking, brutally killing him with 31 blows to the head after assaulting him, and dumped his body near Interstate 5 in Oregon. 4 months later, the partially clothed body of male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was discovered in the San Bernardino Mountains. He had ingested several drugs, and a paper towel stuffed in his nostrils caused him to choke on his own mucus. By early 1982, the relationship between Kraft and Selig had become marred by frequent fights and episodes of temporary separation. In an effort to resolve their personal differences, the couple began attending weekly counseling sessions in Huntington Beach. These sessions began on June 22, 1982. Then, the brutality of the killings escalated. Raymond Davis, just 14, disappeared while looking for his dog in Echo Park. 12 days later, he was found decomposed under leaves, wrists tied and shoelace around his neck. Nearby, 16-year-old Robert Avila was found dead under similar circumstances. He had been strangled to death with a length of stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 24-year-old Modesto man named Arna Mikial Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 freeway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, 29-year-old Anthony Jose Silveira vanished while hitchhiking. 2 weeks later, his body was found, showing the same signs as previous victims. After this murder, Randy left on business, returning with Silveira's military jacket, ready for more victims. Before returning, he stopped in Michigan, staying at the Grand Rapids Hotel where he met Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn. He drugged and assaulted them, then murdered Dennis by suffocation and Christopher by strangling him with a belt after inserting a pen into Christopher's urethra. Their bodies were found on December 9, 1982, in a field near the hotel. Kraft left Schoenborn's keys and Silveira's jacket in his room before fleeing. That month in Portland, he killed 19-year-old Lance Taggs by overdosing him with drugs and suffocating him with a sock in his windpipe. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. Eric Church, 21, last seen hitchhiking from Orange County to Sacramento, was found dead along Interstate 605, suffering similar tortures to Dennis and Christopher, but with signs of struggling against his restraints. He died from strangulation and severe head injuries. On February 12, 1983, Kraft killed 2 Buena Park men, 18-year-old Jeffrey Nelson and 20-year-old Roger Duvall. The 2 young men were last seen outside the house of a friend named Bryce Wilson shortly after midnight when they told Wilson they intended to purchase something to eat. Kraft continued these heinous acts, unaware that his luck was about to change dramatically. It was 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, when Officer Sterling and Sergeant Howard spotted a brown Toyota Celica driving erratically on the San Diego freeway in Orange County. They pulled it over and out stepped Randy Kraft, casually tossing a beer bottle onto the pavement. Officer Sterling noticed Kraft's pants were undone, which was really odd. He had Kraft do some sobriety tests, which he clearly failed, so they arrested him for drunk driving. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howard approached the Celica and observed a young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man. Receiving no response, Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrell, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Searching the car, Howard also found lots of damning evidence: alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescriptions, and an envelope with over 47 eerie photos showing young men in explicit, lifeless poses. Plus, there was blood on the passenger seat, but it wasn't Gambrell's since he had no open wounds. Howard had a hunch they had caught the California Strangler. They took Kraft to the sheriff's department and searched his house, finding clothes and belongings of many young men whose bodies had been found over the years, along with more photos of unconscious or dead men. But the most shocking find was Kraft's coded list of 61 victims, including 4 double murders, totaling 65 young men. Gambrell was not on the list since his death led to Kraft's arrest. After matching the list with discovered bodies, the count reached 67, clearly indicating Kraft needed to face the harshest penalty. The California Strangler was charged with 15 murders between December 1972 and May 1983, after over 700 witnesses were interviewed and more than 250 pieces of evidence were presented. The trial began on September 26, 1988, where Kraft pleaded not guilty but was convicted and sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. Following a moratorium in California, his sentence was changed to life without parole. While his capture brought peace to the region, it left an unresolved question. Did he have an accomplice? Some details of Kraft's crime suggested he might not have acted alone. On one hand, forensic evidence in 2 cases revealed an extra set of fingerprints and DNA that didn't match the California Strangler. On the other, it seemed unlikely that Kraft could have moved bodies weighing up to 200 pounds alone, and it was even more suspicious that he kept them in his car for long periods without anyone noticing. Moreover, the photos Kraft had of the murdered men had to be developed somewhere over the years, yet no photo lab ever reported these images to the police. Initially, it was thought Kraft might have developed them himself, but he lacked a darkroom and the necessary skills. Suspicion fell on Jeff Graves, Kraft's ex-partner, but he died before the police could question him, leaving the mystery unsolved. However, a breakthrough seemed to come years later when Bob Jackson claimed to have the answers. After Dennis McDougal published his book, Angel of Darkness, about the California Strangler in 1991, Jackson contacted him, confessing to killing 2 hitchhikers with Kraft, one in Wyoming in 1975 and another in Colorado in 1976. However, authorities in both states said they couldn't verify these claims. Jackson insisted he knew more about Kraft, claiming Kraft's list only included the most memorable murders and that the real number of victims was closer to 100. McDougal reported this to the police and provided interview recordings. The detectives questioned Jackson but didn't believe him. No murder charges were filed against him, and he was eventually persuaded to check into a psychiatric hospital. Jackson gained some notoriety when his claims were published in a Beach magazine article in January 2000. Meanwhile, Kraft sued McDougal and the Angel of Darkness publisher, claiming the book tarnished his reputation, portrayed him as sick and insane, and hindered his future job prospects, demanding $62 million in damages. The lawsuit was dismissed as frivolous in June 1994, ending the fabrications of the California Strangler. Kraft is still in prison. Despite most of the bodies being found, 22 remain unlocated. The California Strangler shows no interest in aiding the investigation or expressing remorse for his actions. His sadistic crimes are as shocking as his ability to evade capture for a decade, instilling terror and leaving a bloody stain across California.